all of those bits and pieces of information that we get so freely these days, if we didn't get any of that, would that change how you're operating? And in my mind, it wouldn't. I have such a clear idea of what I'm trying to accomplish with the money that I manage that none of those things would matter. You tell me that I can't ever look at a benchmark again. I'll say, okay, Vishal. You would tell me you can't ever know what Buffett is buying. I'll say, okay, Vishal. Like, those things don't really matter. At the end of the day, are you doing what you're trying to do? And that's it. That's your own game. Buffett calls it your own scorecard. But if you know what your game is, that's all you have to know. What everybody else is doing, it's really just entertainment.
Welcome everyone. I am Vishal Khandelwal and this is the 1% Show. This show is an open-ended exploration into the minds of the wisest people around to help us learn to think, invest, and live each day a little better, even as little as 1% better. You can learn more at safalniveshak.com and vishalkhandelwal.com. My guest today is a good friend, Bogumil Baranowski, a seasoned investor, insightful author, and a thought leader in the field of finance and investing. Bogumil is a published author of 3 outstanding books. The first is Outsmarting the Crowd, then Money, Life, Family, and then Crisis Investing. He's also a founder and host of the popular investing podcast Talking Billions. In 2016, with 3 partners, Bogumil co-founded Psychart Associates, a boutique investment firm based in New York City, and he later founded Blue Infinitas Capital. He's also a licensed private pilot, and when not reading, writing, and hosting podcasts, he can be found sailing, surfing, and scuba diving around the world. Join me as I delve into the mind of Bogumil, exploring his remarkable journey, his philosophy on investing and life, and the wonderful lessons he has learned along the way. Whether you are an aspiring investor, a seasoned professional, or simply curious about the intersection of finance, life, and personal development, Bogumil's story is sure to inspire and enlighten you. With this and no further delay, Bogumil, I welcome you to the 1% Show, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Vishal, thank you so much for having me. It's such a generous introduction. You and I had a chance to record an episode of Talking Billions not long ago, and then I felt very blessed to have the opportunity to share a meal, a dinner with you in Omaha with a few friends. And I have to say thank you to Harry, our friend from Thailand who connected us. So thank you, Harry. I know he's listening, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I'm sure Harry is listening. So I talked about our episode, our conversation today, and he was as excited as I am, right? So he's been a great friend and he's a great connector. So thanks to Harry. And happy to be talking to you again after that last dinner that we had in Omaha at Buffett's favorite joint, right? So great.
It was a special place and a wonderful group of people and a very inspiring setting to talk about all kinds of topics. And I think some of the topics will come up today in this conversation that we just got started talking about over that dinner.
That's right. And if you remember, Bogumil, at that dinner, I probably mentioned to you that you have probably one of the calmest voices that I've heard, right? Not just on podcast and otherwise as well. So thank you for that. I'm not sure whether you speak like this from your early childhood or you've developed how to speak so calmly, because I'm sure that voice is a showcase of the inner peace and inner calm that is within you. So
I think it helps me in life and in the professional pursuit that I have. I manage money for wealthy individuals, and it's a huge responsibility. It's a big blessing. I feel very fortunate to be able to work with them. It's a privilege. But at the same time, there are moments and times when it's a stressful pursuit. And I think you need that kind of calm and steady hand to take advantage of opportunities. And sometimes to be that person that your clients can talk to and know that everything will be all right. I think we need somebody like that in our life, whether it's your best doctor, your dentist, or a money manager. We need that person. And I do my best to be that kind of person in the lives of the people that I work with.
That's so great to hear. I think without saying it, probably your voice says to your investors and other friends that you are there for them. I'm sure the voice does this magic, right? So great. Bogumil, to start with, please take us back to your journey. We've talked a bit about your journey, but I would like you to talk about it again. Your journey starting from your early years growing up in Cold War Poland to become the person you are today. And a connected question is, when you look back at your past, what are the most important dots that you connect that has helped you become the person that you are today?
I think it's a wonderful question. And I ask my guests on my podcast about childhood and upbringing because I think there are a lot of stories and secrets and moments, even when we got shaped in those early days, that become very helpful. And I think it pays to take a moment and look back and think about it. And as I'm thinking about this question, I'm thinking of Ken Robinson, who gave a talk a while ago now that I attended. It was at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York, beautiful venue, and he was an expert in education. I believe he passed away a few years ago. And he talked about creativity and schools and education. But one of the things that I walked away with from that talk was that life is as serious as you just said, those dots. And then looking back, it's also obvious that this led to the next one and to the next one and to the next one. You can almost draw the line. But in the moment, it's never that obvious that your life will go this way or that way. You and I spoke, and I know that your life had some twists and turns that you had to ponder and think about how to go about it. But to draw a line through the 43 years of my life, the first decade was a very unique time because it was Cold War Poland, as you mentioned. It was a political and economic experiment. Everything was owned by the government. There was just one party. Limited freedoms, shortages of basic products, although Poland is a relatively wealthy country, but the economy was so mismanaged that it led to shortages. So I have images of that time, and one story that I mention quite often is walking with my grandpa to pick up ration cards. Ration cards are different than food stamps. Everybody had to pick up a ration card. So even if you had money at home, you couldn't go and buy staples. You need to have a permission, the ration card, which is quite ridiculous. But it happened in the past after different wars in different parts of the world. So it's not uncommon, but that's the reality I grew up with. But here I want to highlight that I didn't grow up with a perception that I don't have things or that I'm deprived of anything. As a child, I was very, very happy, and I remain a very happy, cheerful person. I was walking with grandpa, and he would tell me stories, and I thought, honestly, Vishal, that all the kids in the whole world are going on the same walk every month with their grandpas. I thought this is what kids do. And then I realized that my American friends and my friends from all over had very different experiences. And not everybody was walking to pick up ration cards. But I think looking back, it took me a decade or two and a couple of degrees to make sense of what was happening in Poland at the time, why the economy didn't work, and more so what followed, which was a decade of a huge boom, growth, development. The market reopened after half a century. The stock market reopened after half a century. New companies got listed, and there was a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm, followed with hyperinflation, big unemployment. So not all of it was rosy, but it was such a massive catch up, economically speaking, from a frozen state of massive restrictions to a free economy with all the consequences. The stock market went through a big rally and a collapse and so on. I didn't think at the time as the stock market as being a place that I would be interested in. But as a kid, I do remember that I took out a notepad and I wrote down the tickers and the names of the companies. And I think there were 7 or 8 or 9 listed, the major banks, insurance companies. And I would write down every week what the price is. So I was already intrigued. How does this work? But it was such a small market that there wasn't really much to look at. But I was intrigued. What is it all about? So those are the two moments that the first decade, the second decade, watching what's happening. But to me, the big discovery happened around the age of 10 when my parents took me on a long trip to Greece. Poland was just reopening. We took our small car and we drove to Greece. The distance from Poland to Greece, it's about as far as from Maine to Florida. It's a long drive. And it took us a couple of days. But I got to see the world, more of the world, not just Poland, and people speaking different languages. And I saw ancient Greece and temples, and it opened my mind to all kinds of things. So that was a big eye-opening experience. And the second moment, Vishal, was when I decided to become a foreign exchange student. And I left Poland and I went to Brussels. And then I studied with kids from all over the world. And it opened my eyes even more. And Brussels was the place where I really discovered investing. And it was through finding one book that really changed my life. It was One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch. And it was a tiny bookstore. I gave a TED talk about it, and I mentioned the evening when I found the book. And that book really spoke to me because I studied business, economics, accounting, finance, but I couldn't really put all those things together and see how that could work. And that book showed me a way. He explains in the book that stocks are small pieces of businesses. And to you and me today, and probably to the majority of this audience, it sounds like an obvious statement. But to me, the stock market was such an abstract entity out there somewhere that my teachers, because they got burned by the internet bubble at the time, it sounded more like a casino. And that book really pointed me in the right direction. And to speed up the story a little bit more, I set my mind on New York, and I was lucky enough to find an internship in New York City after my grad school. So I left from Paris to New York, and I spent pretty much all of my professional life in New York at two different firms, and starting two. And I'm on the second firm that I started, this one by myself, Blue Infinitas Capital, where I'm working with wealthy individuals and guiding them in wealth growth and preservation with what I like to call an infinite investment horizon. Very patient, very disciplined, all in equities.
That's wonderful, Bogumila. I think it's so fascinating that when we are living in our own country, right, while growing up initially, that becomes a world, and we look at the entire world with that kind of a mental model, with that kind of a glass, that the entire world would also be the same. But like you mentioned, as we move on, as we go out, as we meet more people from different places, different countries, different nationalities, how our worldview expands, right? And I think that brings me to the lesson, the entire idea of what Charlie Munger talks about, the lattice work of mental models, right? So every
Mm-hmm.
country is a different mental model, every region is a different mental model, right? Every kind of human that you interact with is a different mental model, right? And the more you meet people, the more you talk to them, the more you know about their worldview, you tend to also alter your worldview over a period of time. And that's, I think that's a sign of great humility, rather than thinking that my view is the only view that I live with and I die with, right? I think opening up your worldview to different thoughts, different cultures, I think that's something that is amazing. And I think witnessed. I've not been a world traveler. I've not traveled a lot, but I've realized that the more I've traveled outside the place, outside the city where I live, and outside the country where I come from, right? It has really helped me in terms of thinking through things and thinking through the big ideas, not just in investing, but how to live a good life, right? So it's amazing, and thanks for sharing your story over there. uh, Everyone has, I think, one of the most important things that we, or one of the most important questions that we need to answer before setting out on any venture, whether it's investing, business, or anything that we, or any journey that we take in life, is that question of why are we doing it, right? And I'm sure you must have tried to answer that why question for you yourself, right? So my question to you, to get the answer from you, to get your insights, is that why do you do what you do, whether it's investing, whether it's writing, whether it's podcasting, overall the kind of person that you are, what is your why?
So there are many bridges, but I think the biggest one is curiosity. I'm just a very curious person. And I remember when I was a kid, I would pick up books, and I had this Atlas of the World, and it was a massive book, and I was a little kid. And the book was so big that I had to reach my arm far, far away to flip the pages. And I would go page after page and learn about different countries. And I was very intrigued with countries with original names. I remember Trinidad and Tobago. And I thought how funny it is that the name of the country has two different names in it. And then I found out it's an island nation, which was even more fascinating. Poland has access to the sea, but it's not an island. So to live on an island was something that to me was just very curious, interesting, and different. And history, that was something that I was always fascinated with. So I had all kinds of history books, and I was learning about how people lived at different points in time. Egypt was the period that I was fascinated with, and I was fortunate enough to visit Egypt twice on different occasions, and I love to go back. I think it's a fascinating place. But I think it was curiosity that was my biggest why. And when I picked up that book that I mentioned to you, One Up on Wall Street, it wasn't really the mindset of this is a way to accumulate wealth. That wasn't my thought. My thought was this is a fascinating intellectual pursuit. I can figure it out. And it didn't mean I'll outperform the market, I'll outperform everybody else. It was for me, my personal curiosity. I'm fascinated with how those businesses work, and I'm very intrigued with the idea that I can become an owner of those businesses. And the stock market is an enabler in this process, where I can take advantage of other people's panic and buy something lower and then enjoy the benefits of owning that business. But it's also the fact that that business and the management and people behind it will treat me as a minority shareholder the same way they treat a major shareholder or the founder or themselves. So you have all those components, right? The business ownership, the availability of you can buy it, and the fact that you will be treated in a fair way. It really spoke to me. And that was really the reason why I got interested in investing. And then I was very blessed to be exposed to what we call these days Buffett Munger, broadly defined school of thought in terms of investing in quality businesses that we hold over the long run. And we do it in a disciplined, patient way. But my context, you were talking about travel, but also from my professional experience, my context got expanded and expanded and expanded. So the initial thought was, I'll find stocks that go up. I'm joking, but I guess that was the essence at the beginning. I'll find stocks that will go up. But then I realized, why is that? Like, what kind of role do they play? And through the work that I'm doing, and I've been doing for the last 20 years, I realized that those stocks could become a portfolio of stocks. And that portfolio, it's somebody's money. And it's a money with a certain meaning, importance to those clients. It could be a lifetime of savings. It could be an inheritance. It could be a multi-generational fortune that's been with the family for 5 generations. It plays a role. It has a story. It's an emotional charge behind it. It's something that can enable them to make certain choices in life, have the freedom to operate in a certain way. And I mentioned it now and then, just the fact that that money is there has an impact on people, that they can go about their life in a much more relaxed way. The 5 million, 10 million, sometimes it's even $5,000 or $500 that's sitting there that you know that could cover some unexpected expense. That's also a benefit, right? So we're talking about different scales, but the fact that there's money there can have an impact on your life. So I was curious how that bottom-up stock picking can lead me all the way to thinking of growing and preserving a fortune, and doing it not over a year or 3 or 5, but over a generation, over multiple generations. And I think it's hugely helpful because in the world we operate in, we think of investing as very competitive. And I think it is true when you try to play the game of how will the next quarter look like? Will it be better or worse? Will it be a beat or a miss? But then if you think of growing wealth over decades, you're not even participating in those conversations at all. If you're thinking about buying a business for more than 5 years, or you have that comfort and luxury that you could hold it for 5 or 10 years, you might realize that you're the only person in the room. So it is competitive. But if you have that longer, I call it all the way to infinite investment horizon, because the aspiration of a family fortune is to last forever, right? If once you have that kind of wealth, and when I say that kind of wealth, it can be a different amount for different people in a different context. It's not one number, right? But if you have a life-changing wealth, then the one thing you don't want is to lose it. And the second thing you want is to allow it to grow in a way that will sustain you and your kids and your grandkids. So that's my big why. And the different experiences in my life shaped me. The fact that I grew up in Poland, and Poland went through 2 world wars and half a century of communism. This was not the location to preserve wealth or grow wealth. There were very few vehicles that would allow you to even keep the wealth. So the dollar was one of the vehicles that you could use, but there were no shares. There was no stock market. Business ownership was very, very limited. Everything was owned by the government, and obviously the couple of conflicts that happened in the region, if it didn't destroy and burn, and then it led to confiscation. So there was no real longevity in the terms of wealth preservation. In my family, there's a piece of property, real estate property, not a meaningful one, but I like to think of it as the only kind of a ribbon through time that my great grandparents were the ones that bought it, but their parents also used that property. So if you count it with the kids and grandkids that are around today, I think it's 5 or 6 generations that enjoyed in some way that small property. So there's this one experience of longevity. Moving to the US and meeting so many people around the world, I got to see families that have fortunes that have been around for 5 or 6 generations. In one case, I met somebody whose initial seed of the fortune started when Beethoven was composing and doing his work. So which is 200 years, and it's fascinating to think of how many choices, small ones and big ones, and decisions had to be taken for that wealth to be around. So to think of wealth creation, it's usually one single business, one location, probably a handful of individuals. Sometimes we say it's one individual. I think there's more to it. But then the wealth preservation, it's usually you have to engage the whole family. You have a collection of businesses, and you have to be much more thoughtful about the location. And sometimes the location that allowed you to create wealth might not be the location that will allow you to preserve wealth. So it's something to think about. And the last thing I'll say, Vishal, on that topic is that wealth creation, especially substantial, sudden, I mean, when I say sudden, sometimes it takes a decade or two to create substantial wealth. That required a lot of different elements, and a big portion of it is timing and luck and so on. A lot of things lined up. So, but wealth preservation, you can almost eliminate luck out of the equation. You can create a framework, a system that will allow you to preserve wealth. And that's where I step in, and that's how I think of the stock portfolios that I build, that we can create something that will allow you to perpetuate and grow your wealth. Kind of gives your capital and wealth immortality.
I think such a fascinating idea, that just changing your mindset from investing being a finite game to an infinite game, right? Changes so much about how you behave with your investments and the investments that is bestowed upon you. Probably you are a caretaker of someone else's investment, like a money manager. You are not just working for that person, you're working for the future generations, right? And that kind of responsibility, I think it's so difficult to come by. I remember, I think you have a friend, Anthony Deedon, right?
Yes.
And he did a wonderful interview with Grant Williams, which I highly recommend people to go and watch. It's a long interview, but I think it's a remarkable interview where, if I remember right, he gives an example of a dates farmer
Yes.
in Arabia, right? And what the story is all about is that the farmer with whom Anthony is talking to, right? He is now reaping the benefits of the harvest from trees that his great grandfather or grandfather may have planted, right? So they did not got the benefit of the dates, and this guy is getting the benefit of the dates which were planted. The trees were planted several decades back, and now he's planting trees, the fruits of which he's not going to enjoy, right? So shifting your mindset from trying to enjoy all the fruits of investing, that leads to a very short term kind of a mindset that makes investing very competitive, right? You're looking at next quarter or the next year or the next 5 years, thinking that you want to multiply your wealth because you want to enjoy that wealth, to shifting it to a view where you are trying to be a preserver of wealth, right? Of course you're going to enjoy that as well, but you are preserving it for the future generations to make their lives easier. It's such a radical shift in how you look at wealth creation and preservation. So amazing stuff. Uh,
I I love
yeah.
that story from Tony Deedon about planting those palm trees. And it makes me think of a saying that other people repeated, that it's basically planting trees for others to enjoy. And whenever you sit under an old tree, to think of who planted it. There's a tree in the town where my grandparents lived that my great grandfather planted in 1918, and he was a teenager at the time. And I still walk past that tree now and then when I visit. And it's a certain feeling of continuity and connection with the previous generation, right? I never got to meet him. He passed away a few years before I was born. But the tree is there and the story is there. And I think these are the stories that matter when you think about preserving wealth over generations. And I like the point that you're raising. The minute the whole experience of investing money gets elevated the minute you introduce a longer and ideally an infinite investment horizon. The decisions that you make, the way you optimize them, it just, in my mind, goes up, it rises, it experiences this massive upgrade. And it doesn't mean that you will not enjoy that. In many cases, the family enjoys as they go, the benefits of that fortune being there, but the fact that you're building something for the next and the next generation. So that I like this idea that no generation ever has to start from zero again, which I think is it's a massive blessing and gift that we could all think of. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to be born into millions or billions, but that there is something to start with. And I get emails and messages from listeners and readers that share with me all kinds of stories of inheritance within the family and tales from the last 100 or 200 years sometimes, and what an impact it had on them at different points in life, and the stories they tell, how not having to start from zero again, it's such a blessing. So that's one of the aspirations. I would highlight one more thing. When you have substantial wealth, any wealth that means something to you, when you think about it, you don't want to lose it. I had Luca Delana on the show, who does a remarkable job explaining the idea of game overs. Like, there's some games, you talk about infinite, finite games, but in general, when we play a game and there is a scenario that could lead to a total game over, then it's a game you might not want to participate in. In a portfolio management setting, I have this idea of not having any potential zeros. So I consciously decide that any investment I put in the portfolio, I don't want it to be in the portfolio if I can imagine it going to zero. And obviously there can be a massive surprise of fraud, something I can't possibly know about. But there are certain situations where it's something is happening that could lead to a zero. And usually it's too much leverage, questionable management, secular decline. And if you have a business like this, and if you start to compromise and you have a lot of those in your portfolio, you could be in a situation when you have a massive drawdown that you can't recover from. That's something I don't want to have, but I'm sure we'll talk more about it. That what I do is not just about what I want to have in the portfolio, but also the things I want to avoid and not have in my life or in my portfolio. That's equally important, although it's not as visible because it's not on the statement that the client sees.
I think that's such a great idea. This reminds me of what I think this is something which I learned from Peter Bernstein, who said that we need to treat our wealth like our children, right? So we want them to grow in life, but we
Yes.
also want them to be responsible in the same way like we treat our children. We need to treat our
Yes.
wealth that we want to grow our wealth, compound our wealth over a period of time. And for that, we also need to ensure that we are responsible enough to let that happen and not get into areas with the aim of making quick money, right? Thinking it's a very
Yes.
competitive sport, and we end up losing everything. And I think in terms of patterns as well, making and losing is still fine, but if you start with a loss, right, recovering that wealth, right, it may take a multiple generation to. So like you rightly said, not having to start with zero for a future
Mhm.
generation, I think that's a great thought to have if you want to not play that competitive sport that most people are playing in the markets and all around. Talking about trees, uh, in your book Crisis Investing, you write how we humans, while being individuals with our finite life, we are a part of a bigger infinite legacy. And you also told the story of a very special tree that stands as a parable for family wealth, legacy, and fortune. So can you please tell the story here, and also about your bigger idea of we individuals with finite lives being part of the bigger infinite legacy, and how that relates to investing? Though we've talked somewhat about it, but tell us the story of the tree and how it relates to investing and how we look at life.
Maybe as a student of history, I'm fascinated with this continuity through time, and I mention it in a couple of articles, pieces that I wrote, that when you really look at us as a civilization, if we were to burn all the books with every generation, start from zero, that would not be a good idea, right? It's so intuitive that we build on something that somebody else created before us. We talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. I think Newton said that. And with financial wealth, and it's one of many different wealths that we experience in life, but let's focus on that one, given that we speak about investing here. Somehow, so many people not only live paycheck to paycheck, but somehow at the end of their life, they really have nothing to leave. And I'm sure they're leaving other things, love and legacy and stories, maybe art, everything else that they could provide. But it's fascinating that somehow we have, financially speaking, on average, or most of us, I don't know what the perfect statistic would be to represent it, that there's nothing to pass on. So I think this flipping it on its head and thinking, what can we do to actually have something left behind to pass on? Then it's really eye-opening, and I think it gives options to the next generation. They can start from a whole different point, the same way you and I start from a different point, given the books that we can read and the knowledge we can tap into. And we can read everything that's been ever written and recorded and found, because some of the pieces have been lost. But we can go all the way to ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and even read Egyptian mythology and so on, and see and learn from it. So if we can in some way find a way to take this lifetime to accumulate a little bit of that wealth, and maybe even more, and find a way to pass it on in a way that's lasting, I think that would be hugely helpful for all of the individuals involved, but I think a society at large as well. And in my book, Money, Life, Family, I spent a lot of time researching both successful families that I interacted with, but also families I researched. And I mentioned some of the names that are very well documented and talked about, from the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, and everybody else in between. How there are certain ways to go about it and think about, planting those trees and seeing them grow and seeing them last. The special tree that you mentioned is the tree that I brought up a minute ago that my great grandfather planted. And I never met him, but I feel like because of that tree, I have a certain image and connection through time to the previous generations and the stories. And I have an image of him as a teenager standing there with a group of kids from his school planting a couple of oak trees, and one of those trees he planted. So I think that all matters. With family wealth, the wealth itself is important, but also creating this narrative and a story where the money came from. I think it's this intangible glue that can create a bridge between generations, and it gives a context of where the money came from, what kind of role it's playing, and what kind of role it could play in the future. So all those stories can help. Now, the tree is such a beautiful metaphor. I think there's a tree that I describe in one of my pieces. It's the golden aspen tree that actually grows, and it creates a community of trees, like an ecosystem. And then some of the trees don't really live a long life, but the entire ecosystem lives open-endedly. Like if you don't interrupt it, so there are a couple of things that can happen. You can cut it down, or you have a massive fire and it gets burned down. And I like that metaphor because it explains the bigger picture of wealth, financial wealth in this case, where if you overspend or if you poorly invest, then that wealth can dissipate over time. But if you can be just like that aspen that in a way has a way to rejuvenate or regenerate with every generation, it could last for as long as you want. And the more we can practice, and the more families can end up with something, and the more kids can grow up with something, I think it's beneficial for all of us. So as much as I focus on a sliver of the universe with very wealthy families, I think we can all learn from their experience and think about our own finances and our own situation and what we can do about it, and how we can all participate in the longer term, success of the businesses that we own, and the stock market, and the wealth creation and preservation that comes with it. I think that the challenge is that, and I mention it quite a bit here and there when I write, that the experience of wealth feels very sudden. And I'm sure we'll come back to it, but I want to emphasize this because the families I work with, even if they know that the inheritance is coming, the moment that it's actually passed on, it always feels very sudden. And it's such a quick catch up to a whole new situation. And the more we can kind of smooth it out, that transition, so that everybody is prepared and informed as we go, instead of being surprised, I think it's one of the elements of success. But I'll pause here and we can dive into some of the bits and pieces.
Certainly. So, while researching more about you, I was reading your website, and the first thing which I came across on your website is this quote from you, which says, "I consider myself a remote investor, a world bound original thinker blessed with mindfulness." I would like you to elaborate more on this. And how do you integrate these attributes into your investing philosophy and your daily life?
So this is a tagline I developed for my TED Talk, which I gave, I think 6 years ago now. It's called The Great Investor in You. And I tell a story of Peter Lynch and the inspiration for investing. But I also explain how I think everybody should be an investor, not in the sense that everybody has to be a stock picker, but everybody, in my mind, would benefit from owning businesses one way or the other, through even index funds, if that's the only option. But the three elements I mentioned, remote investor, world-bound, and original thinker, I feel like what has helped me as an investor is to create a certain distance from the noise, the crowd, and even the stock market as such. I don't check my stock prices regularly. I think it's not really helping me. But living in New York for many years, I realized that it's a very stimulating city. I love New York. It's an incredible place. But there are moments, and I know that you visited not long ago. I think it was second or third time that you visited. And it's so stimulating that there are moments where you might forget if it's your thoughts you're having in your head or if it's other people's thoughts, because you get pulled into all kinds of events, lunches, and you are exposed to so much that there's a moment where it's very hard to create that distance. And I think as an investor, you have to have a little bit of a distance. I think it helps. And it helps with developing a certain emotional temperament here. And Buffett talks about it in the introduction to Ben Graham's book, The Intelligent Investor, that the book provides the technical, the intellectual framework, but it doesn't provide the emotional preparation that you need. And I think that bit of distance, and I call it remote, that can help in investing. I said world-bound because I feel like it's helpful, and I mean the small and the big world outside. I remember that I would research stocks in New York, and I would be the one of very few that would walk out of the office and actually go to the store that we are researching. I wanted to go and see the store. I wanted to see the experience. I wanted to see if they're customers and how they're treated, and is the staff happy, and how the whole experience looks like. It's nothing that I will see on the balance sheet, Vishal. It's nothing that will tell me what the numbers are, but I wanted to feel the business. And Munger would tell the stories of going to look at Costco's parking lot and saying, how big the spaces are. Look how many cars drive up. Look how people want to take so many things with them and how they love the experience. I think these are tangible things that you can only learn when you walk away from your desk and you go see the world. So I really enjoy that. And when I travel, I look at how different brands are positioned in stores, what people say about different brands. My ears are always open. I'm always curious. I talk to taxi drivers. My wife makes fun of me that I'm the one that always talks to everyone wherever we go, because I feel like everybody has a story and everybody has a message and everybody has something to share with you. And all your research doesn't end at the end of the annual report when you read all the filings, which I think very few people actually do, to be honest with you. But let's leave it between the two of us. But I think the truth is that it's really helpful to go and see those real companies in the real world and see how people interact with them. So that's the world bound. And we started the conversation with the fact that leaving the place where you are can really open you up. And it doesn't mean you have to travel. You come across somebody that's from a different country that's visiting your town, talk to them. They'll give you much more than you can learn from any book that I ever picked up. And I say original thinker because it's tricky to be original in this world, because there's this idea that you can just copy other people. And as much as I find it inspiring to read what Buffett has to say, what Munger has to say, and everybody else that we admire in between, Peter Lynch we mentioned, at the end of the day, it kind of reminds me of a journey that a chef does. Chefs usually take, which is they want to go to Paris and learn French cuisine. It seems to be like a tale, a story that rhymes. And I see the parallel with investing. We all want to be Warren Buffett. And then once you discover French cuisine, you go home, whether it's Norway or Chile or India or Thailand, and then you want to take what you've learned and then use local ingredients, local influences, local spices. And then you put in actually yourself into the equation and you realize, I'm going to make a dish that's really me. And I think that's what investing is about. The way I look at it is, I want my investing to be the truly me. So I know what Buffett did. I know what Munger has done. I know what a lot of other people I admire do. But what would I do after coming back from that metaphorical Paris, coming home, using the ingredients that are available to me, with the clients I work with the temperament that I have, with the curiosity that I have? And that's the original part. And you mentioned, I also talked about being blessed with mindfulness, and I realize how investing can be very stressful and hard, and everything else in between. But you can't operate from a place of friction and tension in a successful way, not in this field. I don't believe you can. So you have to create a space that's calm and that's peaceful, where you can hear your voice, hear your thoughts, and act on it. And the beauty of investing is that the biggest difference you make in times when people are panicking, or when they're too enthusiastic, and it's two sides of the same coin. When they panic, you can't panic with them. It doesn't really help. And when they're too enthusiastic, you don't want to jump in and follow the crowd into it. So you have to create an environment where you can actually operate without that outside noise and stimulation, and you have this calm and peaceful environment to operate in. And I'm not the only one who discovered it. I'm thinking of Sir John Templeton, who I actually mentioned in the TED Talk, how he left New York after a successful career in the city and moved to the Bahamas, where he would receive. Lauren Templeton told me the story with more detail on Talking Billions, how he would receive a Wall Street Journal with a few-day delay. And to trade back in New York, he had to go and bring coins to a phone booth and call back to have trades done. So this environment created some sort of hurdles that slowed him down. He couldn't act on a whim that he has to sell something or buy something. There was a delay. And when I thought about it, I think we all could benefit from that, having that kind of barrier, the distance that we talked about, but also in an environment. And he gave an interview where he says that he thinks he actually became a better investor once he had this more mindful space. Guy Spier also decided to move to Zurich, which is a very quiet place. So, and Buffett from New York to Omaha. Omaha today is a quiet place, but I can only imagine how quiet it was in the 50s when he decided to leave Graham's partnership and move to Omaha.
What you just said tells me that investing is such a personal endeavor, right? We all, like the French chef, right? You learn everything from Paris, but you add yourself to it, to the recipe that you are finally cooking for your customers, for anyone else, right? You add a bit of you as well, that really makes that recipe or that product separate from what you really learned. Talking about Guy Spier and Warren Buffett, and you mentioned how they shifted to Omaha and Zurich respectively because they wanted the environments to be calmer, so that they could think through things, they could get peaceful time to not stress much about investing. They can get enough time to read and understand their own thoughts. You've been living in New York, you've been living amidst all the chaos, living with that chaos and still building an environment of calm. How have you managed to do that? That's a question. And what does your environment look like? If I were to talk about, like Guy Spier says that he does not really have a ready access to Bloomberg, right? You talked about Sir John Templeton, who received the data on stocks a few days later, the Wall Street Journal a few days later, and that really slowed down his investment decision making. That really helped him. How have you shaped your environment while living in the chaos of New York City?
So a couple of things that you bring up that are fascinating. So one is the environment, but then the system, the infrastructure, the fact that I don't use Bloomberg and I don't really read the news unless it's with a massive delay that I want to look up something. And I'm more intrigued about this idea of pieces of information that have a long shelf life rather than something that's disturbing people today. I'm thinking, well, 5 years from now, you and I sit down and say, this was something we should have paid attention to. So kind of looking at it that way. Now, I had spent most of my professional life in New York, but during COVID, my wife and I decided to leave New York, and we spent half a year in 2 cabins in the woods. And the first cabin was a tiny little home at the end of the road next to the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania, about 2-3 hours from New York. And in that environment, I started to see how I'm doing better. that the peace and the quiet and the ability to go for walks helped me. In New York, it would be Central Park, where we spent a lot of time walking. And after that, we relocated to Florida. So Miami is home these days. So it's a different environment. And as much as I can, I spend time in nature and outside. And we've been visiting the Dominican Republic now and then, where I can find peace and quiet. I bring a lot of reading material. So I'm kind of channeling Sir John Templeton with his tropical island choice. But I think having those days, weeks, months, sometimes when you can disconnect and really think and work, and not just within your day with blocks of deep focus, but also longer periods of time. I think that's where I can make the biggest difference. That's when I'm growing. That's when I'm discovering something new. So I'm trying to create that. And it's harder to do in New York. It's gotten much easier being less in New York these days. And I think there's a recipe there. I think, I picture a monk. I don't know why, but an image of a monk comes to mind. When you think about it, when you think about meditation, for example, they don't choose to go meditate in the middle of Times Square. They probably could. I think the most experienced monks could, but you kind of want to go easier on yourself and be kinder to yourself, right? So you start your meditation in a quiet space and where you have no distractions and so on. And the investment process is just like that. Could you do it all in the loudest possible place with all the distractions and people screaming at you? Maybe. But why not make it a bit easier for yourself and then create a space where you can actually be calm, collected, and not have the distractions? And in New York, you would get into any elevator on any occasion, and there would be tickers and stock prices just going up on the screen back and forth. So you would see the market is up today, the market is down today. You couldn't escape it. And I think it gets to you. I also think that the fact that we have this supercomputer in our pockets, a smartphone, that gives us access to our holdings, and that you can so easily, not like Sir John Templeton, that he had to collect the coins and call from a booth to New York to have his trades done, but with one tap, you can sell your shares or buy your shares. I think it makes it much harder. So think of ways that you could make your life easier, in the sense that if you bought it, if you like it, if you want to hold it, maybe don't make it too easy for yourself to sell it. Speaking of Templeton, I'm thinking of Lauren Templeton. She told me how when she was young, she would receive certificates, share certificates, the old school ones. I saw the end of it. I had clients that would bring us boxes of paper certificates. It's an ancient world today. But the fact that you could take that certificate and frame it and put it on the wall, like she did in her childhood home, it made it harder to sell them, right? So they missed a quarter, the stock is down. It's, when you think about it, physically, you have to take the frame down, take the certificate out, go somewhere, have it recognized, and on, and then finally could sell it. So putting that certificate, the fact that you own something we started this conversation with, that you actually own a piece of a business and you want to remain an owner and make it harder to sell, I think that's very important. But back to your question, the environment, both the actual physical place and being surrounded by nature and peace and quiet, can help. And not having too many of the distractions of phone, electronics, beeps, vibrations, and pings around you, I think that can help. And Vishal, if anything, I believe that anybody that can create that kind of boxed off environment in the world that's even more short-term focused and impatient, that you not even changing much will be so much better than anybody else, because everybody else is so distracted and so short-term focused and so impatient that even if you and I just remain the same for the rest of our lives, I think the whole world will speed up along us. But I don't know if that's for the true benefit. I think some things are worth doing fast, but having a nice meal at a nice restaurant in Paris, it's not something you want to rush. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, sure, certainly. I think what you just mentioned reminds me of the great Indian scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, if you've heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
So the Gita talks about the war between good and evil, right? Between two sides, the Pandavas, which were representative of the good, and Kauravas, who were representative of the evil. And when you read the Gita, right, you think about the war. in reality, it's a metaphor of the war within each of us, right? The
Yes.
battle between each of us, so good and bad between each of us. And staying so I could relate your idea of building an environment despite the chaos all around as a wonderful lesson in mindfulness, that you don't need to really close your eyes and stop thinking things to really meditate in life. You can simply close your eyes and just focus on your work, or just put your head down and focus on your work and let the world be. And I think you can
Yes.
still create an environment wherever you are in the world, right? So it's here, it's now kind of a thing, rather than thinking I need to go to a peaceful, quiet place, or need to build an environment that really suits me and that needs a lot of peace. I think you've I think proven that you can create an environment for yourself where you can work with complete calm, complete inner peace. Think about investing not as a competitive sport when everyone around you in that city is thinking of it as a competition, right? So I think that's a great lesson in mindfulness, Bogumil. Thank you so much. And I think that's exactly what you mentioned in your small bio, that you are pursuing that mindfulness, which I think is evident from what you're talking about.
I think, Vishal, that for a moment, let's assume that you would never know what everybody else is doing. Let's assume for a second that you benchmarks don't exist. Nobody ever invented an index of any kind. Dow Jones, S&P 500, they never got invented. And you don't know, there are no 13 Fs. You have no idea what everybody else is doing. Would it affect what you're trying to do? That's how I look at it. And I'm trying to find a collection of businesses that are worth holding, bought at a price that made sense to me. And they will continue to change. The world will continue to change. And I'm thinking of this as a multi-decade or a century-long pursuit or beyond. And in that case, a lot of those things just vanish and disappear. So if you told me, oh, look, that investor is selling what you're buying. Okay. I don't know their context. I don't know their time frame. I don't know when they bought it. I don't know if they need the money to pay off a loan. I have no idea, right? So all of those bits and pieces of information that we get so freely these days, if we didn't get any of that, would that change how you're operating? And in my mind, it wouldn't. I have such a clear idea of what I'm trying to accomplish with the money that I manage that none of those things would matter. You tell me that I can't ever look at a benchmark again. I'll say, okay, Vishal. You would tell me you can't ever know what Buffett is buying. I'll say, okay, Vishal. Like, those things don't really matter. At the end of the day, are you doing what you're trying to do? And that's it. That's your own game. Buffett calls it your own scorecard. But if you know what your game is, that's all you have to know. What everybody else is doing, it's really just entertainment.
I think that's also another great lesson from Buffett and Munger, that you need to choose the games to play that you think you can win, right? Even when others are playing different games, probably they are winning at it, right? You need to still find your own game, because you know that this is the game that you can win at. So it's great learning from the greats out there, like you mentioned. It's good to learn from everyone, but you need to suit that game to your own requirements, to your own personality. A game of investing or anything else.
I think there's a formative period uh, in the life of each investor where you want to know who has done what before you. And I think it's hugely beneficial because it's such a big leap. The lifetime that we have is probably too short to make all the possible mistakes, both in life and investing. And I certainly don't wish anybody to try to make all the possible mistakes. I don't think it's worth it. So I think it's very beneficial. And I think there are too few books that talk about mistakes. And there are too many books that talk about the glory and success. But that's my observation. I think I would benefit a lot more. I have this practice of looking at my own investment mistakes and trying to learn from it. But I definitely love learning from other people's mistakes. Once you reach that point, you can tweak your filter of what's making its way into your world, right? So if somebody writes a book that took them 10 years to develop, I'll give it the attention. But if somebody writes a tweet that comments about a stock that I had in mind, that has no bearing and no value to me. So it's sometimes this idea of how long it took to produce the piece of content. And if it took a lifetime for somebody to write a book, I'll give that book my full attention. I read books all the time, and I think people do it's a remarkable blessing that they choose to share their lifetime of learning, and it's available for a few dollars, and you can just download it on your phone or or get a copy and read somebody's lifetime of experience. I think it's remarkable, and it's the cheapest experience and cheapest education you can possibly get. And you can probably borrow that book from a local library or your friend anyway. But all that to say, once you have this very well-established idea of who you are, that chef that came back from Paris, and you know what you're all about. Of course, we keep up with Buffett and we go and we get inspired, but we kind of have a very good understanding of what he's about. And then I don't have to hear anything else from outside what everybody else is doing. I can just focus on what is it that I'm trying to do. And that's all that matters. I think focus is actually the most powerful thing you can do in any pursuit in life. And I think it's also the hardest to attain. And if anything, it will become even harder given the abundance of stimulation that we get out there.
So I think we're all born with certain kind of talents, right? So, but talent, I think, as the book says, it's overrated. It can only take you so far. After that, it's all a matter of hard work that we indulge in and the focus that we put into the work that we have at hand. You talked about the formative ideas that you need to learn from someone, right? And I'm I'm sure, and I really believe that. I think for that formative ideas to really crop up in your mind, you need to choose the right heroes, the right people from whom you need to learn the lessons, right? Uh, I chose in my own career as an investor, thinker, decision maker, I chose Warren and Charlie. And I know you also hold them in very high regard. Like you've talked about them, you've written about them in your books. We met recently at the Berkshire AGM in Omaha, Bogumil, and we were talking about how the entire experience is so surreal, so worth it. This was my first visit to Omaha, but I think you've been there multiple times. Tell me more about what gets you there, because they are saying the same things again and again, right? But tell me what gets you there and the two, three most important lessons that you've learned from Warren and Charlie.
I think it's a wonderful question. I think that the principles, both in life and investing, are not secret, and they're not really hard to explain and understand, right? Spend less than you make, invest the difference, don't give in to the panic and the fear and greed, and on and on and on. And even what the quality business is, we can all agree on. But I think the truth is that although the principles are known, to actually make them part of your life, that's the hard part. Everybody knows what it takes to be healthy, lose weight, and so on. It's not a secret, right? You have to eat better, exercise a bit, sleep, get a full night's sleep, and so on. You can find the formula. Everybody knows it, but nobody's doing it. If you can get me a pill so I can continue my life as it is, but the pill will fix it, that would be the what people are looking for. So I think what Omaha does for me is this wonderful refresher and reminder of what matters. And it's true that it's the same stories and the same ideas and the same principles, but I think it's helpful to me to hear them again and again and again. And the other aspect is the people. So investing can become a very lonely pursuit. And I made sure that my life is very rich and full. And I think this video conferencing experience, I think, changed the world in many ways. And I was doing Zoom calls before COVID with some friends that I couldn't see regularly. So I feel very blessed that more people feel comfortable hopping on a video call and talking to me about different things. And some of those conversations I record if they want to be a part of it, and then we make it into a Talking Billions episode. But I take many, many calls in between, short and long, with all kinds of people. And I want my pursuit to be also full of other individuals so that I can keep my mind open and curious. And it's a very curated experience, not all the noise. It's more about who I'm letting in. And I'm very, very curious. And I take even short 15-minute calls from some of my readers or listeners because I'm curious who is on the other side of it. So I think Omaha has that human social element to it that you experience and you've seen. It's not just the main event, but it's the dinners, the lunches, the coffees that you run into to people that you know or that know you. And there are all kinds of side events. So it became this whole phenomenon. And I wrote an article about it, how for a few days Omaha becomes something else. And then there's the Cinderella moment where we all run to the airport and Omaha goes back to its sleepy little town. But for those few days, I told my wife that I think I know more people per square mile in Omaha than in other place on earth because everybody shows up at the same time. And some of those folks I haven't seen for years. Some of them are like you that I knew, but I got to sit down and talk to you and spend a couple of hours with you and many others. It's a priceless experience to be among people that are coming from so many places, so many backgrounds, but you have something in common and you came here for similar reasons and will walk away with something enriching from it. So I do hope that that phenomenon continues. I know of other events, but I don't know of anything like it, of that scale, depth, density that Omaha provides. And you asked about the lessons. I think the list is endless. And I'll mention quickly how I discovered Warren. I was reading one up on Wall Street, and in the foreword or the introduction to the book, Peter Lynch mentions that he was so flattered that this gentleman, Warren Buffett, called him. I don't know if it's on all the editions, but in one of the editions, there's this mention. And I thought, why does Peter Lynch care that this Warren Buffett is calling him? So I had to look up who Warren Buffett is. And to me, Warren Buffett was just like a CEO of any other major US corporation. What's the difference? I couldn't really tell. But then I discovered that he wrote a foreword to Ben Graham's book, which I was reading soon after. And I realized he spent his lifetime teaching us about business, but also life, and showing us a way to do business. And I like the Charlie Munger's idea of this web of trust. When you have this web of trust, and it's such a powerful idea in the work that I do. My clients trust me, and I trust the businesses I invest in, that they'll treat me well and the capital I committed to them. Trust is such an intangible concept, but without it, we can't function as a society. That's how we transact. That's how we do business. But that's how we operate. That's how the world moves along. And I find it fascinating. So there are so many bits and pieces. And I know you're working on a Charlie Munger book, and you shared with me a draft of it, and I'm enjoying it as well. But they taught us so much. And I when Charlie Munger passed away, I spent the few weeks after that re-listening to some of the last interviews that Charlie gave. And I thought to myself that, and he mentioned it in one of the interviews, that he was trying to channel Ben Graham. And Ben Graham, who is a legendary investor, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are familiar with him, but he was not just an investor, he was also a teacher. He wanted people to know about investing and understand investing in a certain way. And Charlie says he basically wanted to leave us with something. And I think that's why he rushed to so many interviews in those last few months, where I think they're priceless. And it's wonderful to hear his voice and to know that he's somehow still around and watching. And I like this idea of, where when you're making a decision, a business decision or an investment decision, and wonder for a second, what would Warren and Charlie do? Right? I think it would be a wonderful gauge and a filter of, is this a good idea or is this a bad idea, in the context of two people that have showed us a certain way of operating.
That's right. I think if you remember that incident during the AGM where Buffett was answering a question, and he looks to his left and says Charlie, and then realizes that Charlie wasn't there and Greg Abel was there. I think for that moment, even I thought that Charlie is going to answer that question or add to Buffett's ideas, but then it was a sad realization that he was not there. There's so many things to learn, especially from Charlie. Again, the idea that I think the lasting, the numerous hundreds, thousands of lessons that you can learn from Buffett and Munger, but I think the last idea that I really loved about what Charlie mentions to Jason Zweig in one of the interviews, where Jason asked him, what would you want to be written on your grave, the epitaph, right? What in 10 words can you tell me? And he says, I don't need 10 words, just 4 or 5 words. And that statement was, I tried to be useful. Right? So they've been immensely useful to the world at large, then in their role as teachers and investors, but primarily in their role as teachers. So I think some of the best heroes that you can ever have in your life, and we've been lucky to have them in our lives, thanks to Peter Lynch introducing, and thanks to other people introducing the world to Warren Buffett, or Warren Buffett to the world, rather. In one of your books, you You mentioned about reading a humorous yet serious novel from 100 year ago called Brewster's Millions, and it's written by George Bar McCutcheon, for people who want to check it out. In fact, in India there was a movie made, a Hindi movie made on it. I think it was called Chamatkar, which is magic, if I remember right, or something else. uh, so this book tells the story of a man who inherits $1 million from his grandfather, only to
Hmm.
discover that he has to spend and lose it within 1 year and become penniless to inherit $7 million from his uncle instead.
Hmm.
Between excessive spending and poor investments, he learns a lot in the process and finds the keys to successful wealth preservation. Tell me more about how the story resonates with you and what lessons you believe it holds for modern day investors or people at large.
It's such a wonderful read, and I keep recommending it to people. I think you can see it as just an easy to read story that will make you smile, or you can see it as a collection of really deep lessons about wealth, money, life, and inheritance. And the families I work with, they experience in many ways what Brewster experiences in this book. And this book is it's an extreme kind of story because, as you mentioned, the book is about 100 some years old. So the million and 7 million would be a lot more today. I think it would be 30 and I don't know, 200. I'm not sure, but it would be a lot more. So it's a substantial wealth. But the few things I walked away reading this book that reminded me of the stories I've heard working with a lot of wealthy families, that there's no wealth out there that cannot be lost. So some people think that you're so rich that there's no way you could be poor again. Unfortunately, that's not true. And in these days, we've heard and we've seen billionaires that made money in their lifetime and then took some excessive risks and lost it within days. There was Ike Batista in Brazil that thought he will be the richest person in the world, and he actually had a negative few $100 million net worth a few years later because of high leverage, highly cyclical businesses he was in, just a very, very aggressive growth expansion. And then there was another hedge fund manager that took some massive bets not long ago and lost billions. I think it was a record in terms of billions lost per day, given the leverage that he took on. So there's no money that cannot be lost. And I like this idea that I think is very telling, that there are certain risks that even the richest people cannot afford. I think it's a powerful revelation. So Brewster is doing the opposite. He wants to lose it. And he's trying to end up with zero. The second lesson that I walked away with from that book is that something that Fraser Rice introduced me to. He also works with wealthy families, and he was a guest on the podcast. And he told me about this phrase of living within the confines of your wealth. And I think the word confine kind of gives us this feeling of discomfort, because confine means walls, confine means limits, and confine maybe means something very low above your head. And I personally don't like when there's something right above my head and going into a cave and so on. So the confine is a very uncomfortable word. But that's a very powerful statement, because no matter how much money you have to learn to live within the confines of your wealth. And it's a very hard thing to propose to somebody who feels like they have all the money in the world. But even with that money can be spent and wasted away. So we have to have that uncomfortable revelation where we have to find a way to live within the confines of what we have. And it's for somebody who has a modest paycheck, all the way to somebody that has a substantial wealth. The last big lesson, there's so much more in the book, but the last big lesson that really struck me is that substantial wealth that comes to you, and in this case it's a sudden way for Brewster when he finds out about this inheritance, it's not a dress rehearsal. Usually when you have a situation like this, it's a once in a lifetime. You sold a business, it's a life-changing amount. In many cases, people even have not imagined until that moment of the sale how much money it is. You were just running this business for 2 decades, and now somebody tells you it's 100 million or half a billion or whatever it is. And then if it's an inheritance, as much as there's a lot of talk and preparation, it is very sudden to realize that you are a beneficiary right now of some substantial wealth. And you have to take it very seriously. And I get emails now and then from people that experience that, as much as clients that I work with, and they tell me, now that I'm going through this, I know exactly what you were talking about. And the decisions that you make and how slow you are about going about the investments and so on, it has a huge impact when you realize that it's money that you cannot afford to lose. And I emphasize this because it's the money that the client that I work with, they don't immediately need it, so it can be invested for the long run, but it's money they can't afford to lose. So that kind of a revelation is very important. So it's not a dress rehearsal that we will try the first million and then we'll see if the 7 million are coming. Brewster in that book was in a very peculiar situation where he could go ahead and lose the first million because he knew the 7 are coming. But by the time he's actually ready to receive the 7, we can't even find him. He no longer cares. I think he went through such a massive growth as a person throughout this book. If you really pay attention to the story, that he realizes that life is much more than all about money. And in real life, we're not all Brewsters. If you do experience sudden wealth, it is overwhelming. It creates options, but there's a certain framework, a certain mindset that you can use and apply here to make sure that you'll avoid the worst of the mistakes. I like to say that I want to be the least wrong. I think it's a very humble way of looking at it, that you go into this pursuit as not with a mindset, I have to be right, but what can I do to be the least wrong? And remembering that this is a one-time shot. This is the family fortune. There's no other fortune coming. And we have to take it as seriously as possible. It's a huge responsibility. And all the things that a lot of people worry about, which is short-term performance, what did the benchmark do? What is the other star manager doing? Those things are out of the window in this conversation. You're thinking about just your own pursuit, your own situation. What's the right portfolio for this family in this point of time, and what kind of investments we can make, what kind of investments we absolutely cannot consider, and where is the happy middle that will allow us to grow this wealth over time as they enjoy it now, and the next generation will enjoy it. But it's a beautiful read, and it's a book I highly recommend. It will make you laugh, but I think it will also make you really, really ponder. And I only heard from somebody a week or two ago who just read the book, and because I recommended it, and he said, I understand why you like that book. And it's somebody that's in a situation of a substantial family fortune coming his way. And I thought, certain things you have to discover on your own. I think this book allows the reader to discover certain things on your own. You read that book, you kind of put yourself in that story, and you realize, I don't want to be Brewster, or I do want to be Brewster in other situation where I can learn from Brewster's mistakes, what we spoke about. Let's learn from Brewster's mistakes, and let's not make Brewster's mistakes.
Life too short to make all the mistakes yourself. I
That's
think
true.
there's a saying about money that money solves only money problems, right? But I think what I also realize, and in my own experience and looking at experience of other people, is that I think it's such a great, apart from all the functions that money performs in our lives, right? I think either it ruins you, leads you to the wrong paths, or it helps you grow as an individual, like it helped Brewster. Uh, I I remember reading this thing about John Saforic, you quoted in your book, and he wrote this wonderful book called The Wealthy Gardener, where he mentioned how many things are indeed more important than money in our lives. But overcoming the money problem allows us to focus on these important things. And without money and time, we yield little power over life. So, money is so important for us in solving a lot of other problems in our life. What are some of these important things for you that solving the money problem has led you to prioritize in your own life, and how do they enhance your overall well-being?
I think time is the most precious asset that we have, but I'll come back to it in a second. So I mentioned John Safaric in the book, and I had John Safaric on the show on Talking Billions, and we had a wonderful conversation. And he told me something that really stayed with me. He said, after creating all that wealth for his family, he had this moment where he could go on a walk in the middle of the week and just enjoy it. And he said, and don't feel guilty about it. And we both paused in that moment because I thought, you just told me the secret. And the secret is that you want to be in a place, in a position where you can do what you want with your time, with your life, as you please. And money is an enabler. Money is not a goal in itself, but money is an enabler that allows you to relax and pause and think and do whatever you like. And people approach me with that question about how much money is enough, or what does it mean to be rich. And I think it's a very personal pursuit. Money has a very emotional charge. I told somebody a story the other day how if you go for a walk, Vishal, this afternoon, and you find a penny on the street, that little penny will have an impact on you. That's my best guess. You will smile. You will feel like, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. Look at me. If I can find a penny, what else can happen? That's good, right? So that little penny that's meaningless in a financial context has an impact. So think about a larger amount, what an impact it can have. If you have 6 months of life expenses saved, and you had a period in your life when I know you were thinking about it, we spoke about it on Talking Billions, how having some savings, they give you a buffer to think, to switch careers, to do something else, to say no to a boss, anything else, or say yes to a project you've been excited about, launch a new business, just like the one I launched 3 months ago. All those things, just because you have the savings, give you the option. So money has a huge impact. And John Safari says, it's really the time you have the permission to do whatever you want. In my own pursuit, and it's kind of like eating your own cooking, or whatever the saying is, that the shoemaker that's not walking barefoot. The idea is that if I'm immersed in this money, wealth, investing pursuit, I better have my own life figured out as well in the process, right? So it comes from a place where obviously I invest in the same stocks that my clients invest. There's a huge, complete alignment on that side. But also that I think about my own life setup so that I can be in a place where I can make business decisions and investment decisions and life decisions from a place where it's not tension, friction, and stress, where I have to accept the client that I wouldn't like to work with because I need them, right? All the way to making all kinds of, smaller and bigger decisions, but having that comfort. So it's been important for me to have a certain level of financial comfort so that I can operate in a world where I don't feel that friction. And it's a different level for different people. I pay attention to where the money goes and how it's spent. And we haven't talked about it, but I'm not excited about spending money. And it's not that spending is good or bad. I think I got shaped by a certain childhood experience. In Poland in the 80s, there were not many options to go and spend money. So by the time I was a teenager, I really didn't develop the idea that I have to go and spend money. I didn't see spending as an entertainment. But I thought of having some sort of a limit on spending allows me to accumulate wealth, and that wealth can provide the options to invest in businesses and grow it over time. So I think you have to have a certain alignment as a professional investor where your own personal life is organized in a way that allows you to serve your clients better because you don't have to worry about tomorrow. It's all connected, Vishal, at the end of the day. I can't imagine having a lot of personal stress and friction and then being a good advisor to other people. You have to have everything aligned. I think the word would be alignment across the board, from both the investments that I choose are good for me and my clients and me, and then having a life of peace and quiet where I can think, where I don't have to worry about the the bills that are coming up or anything like that at the same time. And as I see my own snowball, rolling down the hill and covering snow as it goes, the same as it does for my clients, different snowballs, different pace, different, but it's all connected at the end of the day. I can't imagine it any other way. Yeah, it's been a very fortunate and blessed life. And one thing I want to add here is that in some professions, you might not want to be your own client. And somebody pointed out to me how in some professions you would love to be your own client, right? So we talked about chefs. If you're cooking some incredible food, you would love to eat it too. But if you're an incredibly good brain surgeon, you're not living all your life hoping, oh, I wish I can become my own patient one day, right? So there are certain pursuits that you don't want to become your own patient or your own client. But in this pursuit, isn't it beautiful that at the end of the day, you would love yourself to become your own best client? And some investors actually told me that they feel like they themselves are the best client because you are in your own head. You know why you bought it. You don't even have to explain. But you can share it with other people and you can live a life of service. And you talked about being useful, Charlie Munger. I think the beauty of what I do is that I'm of service to other people. It's been a long time since I was doing it for a paycheck. And I feel very fortunate and blessed that I have 20 years of experience. I've seen a lot of things. I've done a lot of things. And I have a very wide range of different perspectives and frameworks that help me. And I continue to learn. I continue to get challenged. But I have this wonderful way to be able to share with others and work with clients that I think can benefit from what I do. And it makes me happy to see that the money grows over time, becomes even more meaningful, and creates even more options. And they come back to me and tell me stories that their kid could take a gap year, or they could do this or that, or launch a business or do something else. I feel like that money, just like that one penny, empowers them to do all kinds of things. And sometimes it's just the fact, what I mentioned before, that it's sitting there, it's available, it could be used if it's needed. It's such a powerful thing. So if I can play that role in people's lives and give them the peace and calm that they need, and that they don't have to worry about money, I think it's something that I'd love to continue to do for the rest of my career. I'm 43, 20 years into this industry. If I'm looking at Charlie Munger, I'm only getting started, but I'm very excited about what's ahead. And I feel very, very blessed to have people like you in my life and a network of wonderful people like Harry and everybody else that we know, but also the wonderful clients that trust me and want to work with me. And I'm always curious to meet more people that I can help in many different ways.
I think the feeling is mutual, Bogumil, having you in my life and having people like friends like Hari in my lives, connected with so many wonderful people out there. And I think that's all part of compounding, right? That's all part of compounding that we really realize and see in our own lives, just doing the work that we love doing, thanks to solving that money problem. And I think that's such a powerful concept that if you can put some constraint on how you spend your money, and if you can delay some gratification, those initial constraints actually remove a lot of constraints in how you live your life, where money is not a part of equation. Things that you do which are not measured in terms of money, you get that independent of doing that when you solve that money problem initially. It's such a powerful concept, uh, in a world where delayed gratification is largely looked down upon, right? And that is probably a competitive advantage to have, personal competitive or personal moat, if I were to use that word, to have that delayed gratification gene. Maybe you grew up with it, maybe you develop it as you grow up, but I think it's so important to have. Of course, you don't need to delay all gratification, you still need to enjoy your present, you need to strike a balance. But then it's always a good idea to remember, like Charlie Munger says, right? He said that he never wanted to get rich, he wanted to get independent, right? So that
Yes,
independence or that freedom is such a wonderful concept that we can have, and we can all get, if we can understand that power of compounding and power of putting constraints on the way we spend our money, so that it removes all constraints in how we live our lives.
I like the sound of that. That's true. At the end of the day, this investment pursuit is really a license to learn when I think about it. And the fact that we buy stocks and they go up and they turn into portfolios and so on, if that of course happens, but it's really a permission to go and learn. And I haven't found any other pursuit where I have this kind of freedom to go and read and learn. If you looked at books that I'm reading, they're all over the place because I'm curious, and they all give me a little bit of what you mentioned, the mental models and understanding of different pieces of the world. And here I am sitting down and sitting in front of this massive lab that we call the stock market, where I can deploy all of that the way I imagine, 25 years ago when I picked up that book, and do it every day. And I feel very, very fortunate to be able to do it. And people find it helpful and valuable. And I feel like I'm useful in so many people's lives. And I hope I get to do it as long as I can imagine.
I think that wonderful feeling of being useful, and also that intellectual stimulation that you derive from the process of investing. Probably that is what brings 30-40,000 people to Omaha again and again every year, just to be in the company of those people who are also intellectually stimulated, who are curious, right? Who are coming there to learn the same lessons, but to meet their old friends and maybe learn something from them, maybe pass on something to them. So it's a wonderful thing. Uh, my next question to you is seeking your advice for a 20-year-old Bogumil. right? You're 43, right? But I'm sure you have some good advice to give to the younger generation, or someone who's like a young Bogumil growing up, if not in Poland, maybe in US or maybe in India, right? And that person, that Bogumil, is probably going through a world where the pace of change is just multiplying compared to what it was maybe 20, 25 years back. So given all that we are seeing all around us, uh, we also understand, and you rightly mentioned that talk by Sir Ken Robinson about how schools, I think it was about schools killing creativity, right? So
Hmm.
the formal education system that we have, I think it seems insufficient to teach all that is required to thrive in this ever changing world, or rapidly changing world. Given all that, what advice would you offer to a 20-year-old self, or to young adults in self educating themselves, and what are some of the key skills in life or work or investing that they must learn and hone to do well over the next few decades?
I would start with trusting your curiosity. I think curiosity can give you the answer. And you brought up formal education. I think we all have to go through schools and get degrees. I agree. But I think the schools are up against a massive challenge. And I had some guests on the show who were explaining to me something that I found really important, is that the future belongs to people that can ask better questions, simply put. And the past belonged to people that could repeat whatever we were supposed to memorize. And we have so many tools to look up things these days that I don't have to memorize. I have to know where to find it. But I think the experience will be, how can I improve the quality of my questions? And it goes in line with what we talked about, collecting different mental models, reading, asking. So that's one part. There's a human element to it, and you and I appreciate the network of people in our life. And I think if you can start it early and keep people in your life, I'm thinking of Guy Spear, who is still friends with people that he went to college with, and that I met, and I find it something that I really admire, that being able to keep those long term friendships in your life. And I have a handful of people that have been in my life over the last 2 decades or more, and I value that. And I think it's important to collect and keep people in your life over time. And I think at 20 you feel like you'll meet so many more, and it's true. But then you realize that some people are here to stay. And meeting you, I knew that you're here to stay, and I love having people in my life that are here to stay. So having that idea and compounding that over the next 20, 25 years, if you're 20 today or if you're 15, I think it's hugely valuable. And I like that element. I called it, I borrowed the term from Chobani's founder, and our friend Direk introduced me to the idea of return on kindness. I think we might be under the impression that it's either I'm winning or you're winning, kind of a win or lose setup in life. But I think there's a lot of room for just kindness. And that's what I walk away from Omaha, and quite a few experiences that I have, that kindness takes you really, really far, further than you, cutting the line and feeling like you got ahead of somebody at a coffee shop or whatever it is. And I think that kindness, people remember kindness. And I have so many reminders of that in my life in recent years. And even the fact that Harry goes out of his way to put us together and introduce us and host us and all that. But kindness is such a powerful idea, and it can really pay off. And I remember in my early days when I was a junior analyst at a New York firm and running around, and I had to put together the weekly agenda, and people remembered me as this thoughtful but also very respectful and very kind person. Kind doesn't mean you can walk over the person. That's not what it means. And they would treat me in a way that was different, because they were kind to me because I was kind to them. And I realized there are others that are trying to be, harsh and the opposite of kind, and they think they can get places quicker. But quicker is not always the way. I think kindness is something that will pay back again and again and again. And it's I think it's valuable to remind us of that in the business world, where we think it's so cutthroat and so on. But let's go back to that web of trust. Do you think you build that web of trust by being unkind, or by being kind to people and respecting them and treating them the right way? So I think if you follow your curiosity, If you build a network of people, keep the friends throughout your life, and if you're just kind, I think you will do just fine. But I'm very excited about the next few decades. I feel like I got to witness such a massive change in my lifetime, and it doesn't compare with my grandparents or great grandparents who might have remembered the horse carriages and a very different world without electricity and so on. But I got to see this massive change even in my professional career. I went to the New York Stock Exchange in the early years when I came to New York. It might have been the first summer, and there were still paper tickets on the floor of the stock exchange. It was still an active floor with traders, and one of the traders gave me one of those paper tickets that said bought, sold, and he said, just tuck it away, take it home, because those papers will go away. We were switching, and I went to the New York Stock Exchange 4 or 5 years ago, and it's a peaceful, quiet place. I think you could almost meditate in the middle of the New York Stock Exchange, in the middle of the trading day, and I'm not joking, because it's all the trading moved to electronic virtual trading, and there's just a big TV station set up to report about the market, but the actual activity is happening in between computers, and there's no people running or screaming. It feels almost like a church or like a temple. It's quiet. So I saw this massive change, and I also saw a massive change in terms of the use of paper, paper forms. It all went to digital, and how virtual and remote our work has become as well, and the ability of you and I talking. I don't know how many thousands of miles apart we are today, but I think it's almost a 12-hour difference. Or is it a 12-hour difference? I don't know. Is it?
It's 10 and a half hours, 10 and a half hours. So almost on the opposite sides.
Right. There you go. So I'm just blown away. So I can only imagine when you ask about 20-year-old what they will see, and we will see with them. And all I hope for myself is that I can keep up with the change. And I'm just fascinated with the different business models, different opportunities, different ways to learn. If anything, I see boundaries and limits and obstacles and distance becoming secondary. And I think there will be so many ways to spread ideas and inspiration. And I can only imagine what it means to be 20 years old. I'll tell you one quick story. I was actually interviewed by somebody who was 18, 19, and I spoke with somebody who was 15 who was getting into investing and was sharing some notes with me. And one of them asked me, how did you learn about investing before YouTube? And I said, I went to a bookstore. I grabbed a book, I sat on the floor, and I read the book. And I thought how fascinating it is that they still want to learn what we learn, what you and I learn, but they learn it in so many other ways that were not available to us. There was no way for me to look up a recent Warren Buffett speech. I don't think they were available. I think people have started doing transcripts at some point, but not at the time just yet. You had to go to Omaha. And I think they started streaming only 8 or 9 years ago, just the main event. So I thought about it, and I realized the younger generation today has so many more different ways to pursue their curiosity than I did. I went to bookstores, I went to libraries, and I went for those big index folders and was looking for different books. It's a different world. I can look up things online. But just because you can look it up, I don't think it means that everybody is looking it up. I joked, but I don't think it's really a joke that people don't actually read annual reports. So just because it's available doesn't mean that people actually do it. And I think it leaves a huge advantage to those of us that have the time, have the patience, have the discipline to actually go to the source and learn about a business, learn about the company, and then make our investments. So pursue your curiosity, keep your friends for life, and be kind. It's a small world. It will come around.
I think that lesson on kindness is so invaluable. We all are living on this planet that Carl Sagan called the pale blue dot, which
Mm-hmm.
is hanging in a tiny part of the universe, a huge universe that is there. And there is no other way but for us to live with kindness, because if we are not doing that and we are destroying each other, there's no help which we can expect to come from outside this planet. So we have to take care of each other, right? And I think that also ties in so well with the idea of zooming out, right, and looking at not just investing but our lives as a tiny microcosm in this entire huge universe. And given this, there's no other way for us but to be kind to each other, I think. That's the only way to thrive and survive, if we have any hope for the humanity to survive the next few million years as well.
No, it's a small little planet that we have, and it's one of a kind. And we haven't found another one like it. And we are so fortunate to be living on it. And I think we should treat that planet with equal kindness that we treat each other. I think that's also a lesson, but I'm sure a topic for yet another podcast. But I think kindness is really the answer to a lot of trouble that we might be facing.
I'm sure, Bogumil. So we have not interacted much. We've I think had three interactions: one on your podcast, one on today, and one during the dinner at Omaha. But somehow, as I mentioned, I see that calmness in your voice. I also probably started to believe that you are a spiritual person. I may be wrong, but I think I'm right. And if I'm right in my assumption, what does spirituality mean to you? And how does it, according to you, how does it play a role in the life of a modern day thinker, a decision maker, and an investor?
I think it's a beautiful question and means different things to different people. And I'm reminded of William Green, who was on my show, who wrote Richer, Wiser, Happier. He was a wonderful person, a wonderful podcast, and just a joy to be around. And he reminded me that you can see everything as a miracle, or you can see that nothing is a miracle. And I live a life where I see everything as a miracle. I'm in awe of things. And I'm in awe of the businesses I find. I'm in awe of people that I get to interact with. I feel like the way you look at the world is what you get. And that curiosity, that kindness, I think it translates to a much more enjoyable life. I can have a very engaging 45-minute conversation with a taxi driver in a part of the world that I don't know, learning about the life that he's living. And I just see it as a miracle that I get to do it. When you think about it, it's something I couldn't imagine. Maybe, growing up, I feel like the world has become a real open oyster to me. So yeah, there's this element of seeing things as bigger than you are. That's spirituality to me, and how seeing that all of it is connected and we are all connected in one way or the other. And if anything, the world we live in today allows us to lean on those connections much more than we could in the past through the technology and through the opportunities that we have. But I think of it as a big picture. You could ask me, what is it that you do? And I could say, I pick stocks that go up. And I would be like that bricklayer that shows you the brick, that puts it down on the ground and he says, this is it, right? And there's this story that you could ask a couple of bricklayers, but one of them will say, listen, I'm building a cathedral here. And that's how I look at the work that I do. Yes, I pick stocks that go up, but we're building something that will last, that will outlast me and you. And we're building something that will serve you and your children, or charitable causes that you're passionate about, whatever it is. But it will make a big difference. So if you look at your life and your work, and I think it's very helpful. You asked about the 20-year-old. You're trying to find a job that will impress your friends. You're trying to find a job that will make your parents happy. But think of it building a cathedral. Like, what would it really mean to you? And what kind of pursuit you would choose if you were building something bigger that gets you out of bed? People talk about passions and fascination, but if you come across somebody that is in a certain field, whether it's a brain surgeon or a money manager, that is all in it and they had to do it, and it's their passion and fascination, and this is the only thing they want to do, you would love to have somebody like that in your life, and you would love to be like that. You would love to be a person like that, because I get out of bed and I'm just so excited to get on this call and talk about investing with you. Then I'm equally excited to pick up an annual report and learn about a new business. If you can find something like that kind of fire in your life that allows you to see that you're not just putting a brick down, you're building something that has an importance and meaning and goes back to what you brought up, being useful. I think that's a wonderful spiritual way of looking at the world and seeing everything as a miracle, because it really is. Look, you mentioned the blue planet. What are the odds that you and I ended up on this tiny little globe in the middle of nowhere and spinning in space, and there's just enough oxygen for us to breathe, there's just enough water for plants to grow, there's just enough of resources, and it's just the right temperature for us not to freeze or not to cook. And well, so far it's been just enough space for all of us to find a little bit of room on this planet, and I hope that remains the case. And I'm not that excited about going to space. I'm in love with this planet, and I hope I get to live on it. I listen to Jeff Bezos, and he says we're going to be living in those aluminum cylinders floating in space. Well, I'll pass on that. I'll stay here. I really like, and I'll trade a walk in the woods with birds above my head, or a walk through the park over a night in an aluminum cylinder floating in space any day. But that's just me. We're all different. I think that Jeff wants something else than I do. But anyways, I feel like look at it all as one incredible miracle, and we have the small miracles and the big miracles. To me, it's a miracle that I was born in Poland at a peculiar time, and I got to leave and grow and learn and get my education around Europe, come to New York, have a wonderful career, meet fascinating people. Like all of those things to me are a miracle, and the fact that I get to live the life that I have, surrounded by people that I found or that found me, I feel very blessed, and I feel like all of it is one big miracle, just as William Green reminded me.
That's beautiful, Bogumil. You read a lot of books, and you mentioned that you're a voracious reader. But if I were to ask you, if you had to give all your books away but keep one, just one, which book that would be?
There are so many. There's so many. I've been rereading a book that I'll bring up today in this conversation. It's The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And it's a short book, but it's such a beautiful book. And I read it years ago, and I don't think I was fully ready to embrace it. And it's a story of a shepherd that goes on this big journey. And I'm not going to ruin for those in the audience that haven't read it, but he goes on this self-discovery journey. And it's also a story behind the book. And I love stories behind the book if I get to know them. And Paulo Coelho shares how this book was basically a failure. Nobody wanted to publish it. And once it was eventually published, it didn't sell. I think he jokes that the same person bought this book a few months apart, and that was the whole sale. And finally, the whole world discovered this book. And then Oprah and Bill Clinton and other famous people were seen reading it or walking with that book. But it's a wonderful read. And I rediscovered this book through my wife. We were in Richmond at Markel's meeting, and she was running around bookstores, and she found an older copy of that book in the bookstore. I miss going to real bookstores, by the way, actually feeling the books. I feel like I see all the books behind you right now, and that makes me think of the old school bookstores where you can sit on the floor and read the book and feel it. But she brought that book with us, and I ended up rereading that book. And I highly recommend going back to some of the books that made an impression on you, the same way I reread One Up on Wall Street since, and other books, because life experience gives us tools to interpret the book in a different way than it did 5, 10, 20 years ago. And it's a wonderful, inspiring book it's a very spiritual book. You brought up spirituality, but it's a book about a journey where you learn more about yourself, the way Santiago in the book learns about himself. And at the end of the day, discovers what he really wants. And I'm not going to give it away, but it's a wonderful story. And the slower you read it, and it's a quick read, so it's hard to read it slow, but I got to see so much more in this book that made me think of my own journey. The question that you started with, how would you connect all the dots? Here you are in Cold War Poland in 1980. And there you go, New York, managing money for some wealthy individuals and thinking about a 100-year perspective for a family fortune, or being in Omaha 2 years ago, and call it luck or synchronicity, but I got to ask Warren and Charlie a question. I don't know if you remember, but I asked them about a 100-year vision. And I brought up that Warren wrote about Ben Graham, that he was the one who planted, who was one of the people that would plant trees for others to enjoy. And I said that you too, Warren and Charlie, you're the kind of people that plant trees for others to enjoy, because that's what Berkshire and the whole educational experience behind it has become. And I asked them about a 100-year vision for Berkshire, because I think of the families I work with as what's their 100-year vision. That's the question they come to me with. How do you think about a 100-year vision for the firm, for the company? And they both gave me wonderful answers and brought up Ben Graham's memories. And basically told me this company's here to stay, built to last, and I like that expression that hopefully will do more good to the world, be useful. And I thought of it as a wonderful way of looking at of the presence of a business in the world, that it brings more good. That's one of the reasons why any business is around, not just the profit, but it does something that people find beneficial and helpful. But yeah, these are my thoughts.
That's wonderful, and I think it's a great reminder. Thanks for reminding me to read The Alchemist. I
Mm-hmm.
started reading serious reading very late in life, maybe when I was around 2023. And Alchemist, I remember, was the first book that I read cover to cover.
Uh-huh.
And thanks to your reminder, now I need to go back. That after 23 years, maybe 22, 23 years later, I'm a completely changed person, I'm sure. And probably if I pick up Alchemist now, which I'm willing to do right after this conversation, I'm going to find new insights and new light to show me better ways of leading my life henceforth. So thanks for that recommendation, Bogumil. Uh, my next question is about habits. We are all creatures of habits, right? And this is what leads us in life. Uh, uh, Good habits and bad habits, right? But talking about good habits, overall, what habit would you say has had the most positive impact on your life, and how did you go about cultivating it?
And I can pick just one.
Yes, maybe you can pick two.
Well, if it's two, I would say reading and writing. And I'll tell you why. I feel like books are a window to the world, and they can transport you to new places and introduce you to new ideas. So I hardly ever fall asleep at night without reading a few more pages of just about anything that I've been reading recently. And it's such a habit that I almost can't fall asleep without reading just a few more pages of something new. And it just puts a new idea in your head. I fall asleep easier, and I'm trying to read something that will introduce me to something new. And the other half of that experience is writing. And I think writing is an underrated, but I think hugely beneficial tool to organize your thoughts. And there are some people that publish. I only started publishing, well, I feel like only, but it's been about 10 years that I decided to not only write for my own benefit, which I've been doing for a long time, but also for the benefit of others. Some people call it learning in public. And I think there's some truth to it, because once you write something for yourself, it's a big step. But if you write it and you publish it and other people can read it, and I know that you can relate to that, it it takes on a life of its own. And you have only that much control over it, because people read it with their own eyes. And I love that when they approach me and they read something I wrote, and they see what I wrote, just as we talked about The Alchemist, through their own experience. And it's fascinating to see, because I'm wondering, where is this in the book? And they say, no, it's just I read it, and this reminded me of my grandma, and this story and that story. And it opens up a whole treasure chest. And I love hearing it, to see how the books have an impact. But if I can sneak it in, I have to tell you, Vishal, that podcasting has been an incredible experience, and it's a habit and a routine these days in a wonderful way. So I created a system that allows me to release one episode every week, and I've been doing it for about 2 years now. I record, as probably you do too, a couple at a time, and then I have a week or two break so they get released. But it introduced a whole new dimension to my life. So I have a conversation with a client that inspires a question, and it's on my mind, and I'm pondering. And then I get on a podcast and I'm talking to someone, and I always feel like the universe sends messengers our way. I don't know if you feel that way. And then they might not even know that I was thinking about it, but they tell me something that tweaks. Sometimes it's a turn of phrase or something that makes me realize, oh, there's another way of looking at it. And then I write about it. So it creates this flywheel, a circular experience of my client work, my investment world, that influences my podcast, that influences my writing. And it can start at any point of that, right? So I wrote something down that introduced a new question to the podcast, and I'm learning something from somebody new, and on and on. But having that kind of flow of ideas and inspirations, these habits have really been very, very helpful in my life. But when I hear the word habit, it almost seems like somebody's making you do that, and I don't know if that's how I hear that word, because is it a self-imposed? Usually, a habit means I didn't feel like doing it, you made me do it. I don't look at it that way. I just see it as something that becomes my routine, and I love the routine. And if you can fall in love with your routines, I think it can have a huge benefit, as long as those are positive. You talk about the 1%. Now the whole podcast is about being a bit smarter, a bit better every day. But think about, if you read a few pages every day, if you're introduced to a new idea, and that idea grows on top of the previous one and the previous one, the compounding that we all are so fascinated with, what kind of a huge benefit it can have in your life, that you sit down here 10 years from now, and you're not just 10 years older, but you're 100 times wiser in so many different ways. I think I can't imagine any other way of living than opening new books and reading new books. And it's fun to look back and see how different books had an impact on you, and going back to some of them rereading. I'll mention a quick story that I don't think I mentioned before. At my school, in high school, I remember, and even before high school, every year, if you had good grades, you would get a book from the school as a gift. And I always wondered, how did they choose those books? But the books that I received over the years were books about travel, adventure, pirates. I remember reading Stevenson's Treasure Island, and I remember reading Old Man and the Sea, Hemingway. And, those stories stay with you, and you live your life looking for those images and traveling the world. And I was in the Caribbean walking on the beach one day, and there was this older gentleman in a blue boat, a long fishing boat without an engine. And he was a frail old man, and he was rowing to the shore. And I was looking at him from far away, how he was very slowly making it to the shore. And he was going slow because he was looking at the beach. There was an empty beach early in the morning, and he was looking for somebody that could help him push out that boat from the water. And I immediately thought, I am living in that moment, that day, in Hemingway's book, Old Man and the Sea. He came to the shore, and needless to say, he asked me for help. So the two of us, with the help of one more person that joined a bit too late, we were able to push out his fishing boat, that he would not be in a position to ever move on his own, out of the water onto the beach. And I was thinking, that image that got planted in my head at 12 or 13 of Old Man and the Sea. Some of the audience might know it's a story that Hemingway tells in his book about an old man who fails to catch a big fish for many, many weeks and loses faith. He doesn't lose faith. I think everybody around him loses faith. And he eventually catches this big, big fish, and his life turns around. Just a very deep, wonderful story of perseverance in life, and just beautifully told. Hemingway has a gift. So here I was standing on that beach, and I was thinking for a second, I am living for a brief moment a story that I read in a book. How funny it is that the books can become our life, and our life becomes the books we read. So be careful which book you pick up. I think that's all I have to say. Because you might end up one day being a character in that book. Just a thought,
That's
what kind
a
of
great
book
lesson.
writing?
That's a great lesson. So my next question to you, Bogumil, is about the best piece of advice you ever received, and also the worst piece of advice. If there was a bad advice that you, in hindsight, you realize it was a bad advice that you received early in your life and career. So what are those best and worst advice that you ever received in your life?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I don't know which one to start with. I'm going to start with worst, and I'm going to focus on the investment side a little bit. I have a very vivid memory of the financial crisis, 0809. So I was 3-4 years into my career in New York, and it was a very peculiar time. Housing market crashing, but then what followed was Lehman and other banks failing, and a massive correction in the market. And I remember it vividly because I was watching much more seasoned investors, and I was wondering how they react, what they do about it. And in New York, I would go to those idea lunches and dinners. And I remember one specific idea dinner. And I think I also mentioned that story in my book, Money, Life, Family. and Outsmarting the Crowd. I might have mentioned it in both of them, where I was sitting in a restaurant in New York, and it was a sponsored event, and people would go around the room and mention what their best ideas are. In New York, people would do that now and then. And we went around the room. It was the midst of the financial crisis, at least from the stock market perspective. So it was about March of 2009, close to the low. And we went around the room, and I'm not joking, Vishal, but a person after person after person, people that were twice or three times my age, were saying, you should buy US treasuries, which means basically get out of the stock market and go to the safest asset you could go to. And we went around the room, and I actually brought a stock. And I was a little bit surprised because I was thinking, if I learned anything so far, and it was only 3-4 years into my professional career, I might have been watching the markets for longer, but professionally speaking, it was very soon after I started. I was thinking, I see so many quality businesses that we couldn't buy before, and now they're available at very low prices. And the market was very haphazard and I would even say inefficient in the way that the most liquid, the most respectable companies were actually dropping faster at that time because they were so liquid that people that were desperate to liquidate stocks, they would sell the quality more, at least, week to week, it would change. So I was really shocked that the entire room of investors with so much experience were telling me to buy treasuries. And I thought to myself, and it was a lesson for the rest of my life, that in moments like this, you have to just trust yourself. You can't ask for anybody. You can't outsource your conviction. You can't hope that other people will pat you on your back and say, this is the time to go in. And I experienced that in some other way since, but the other time, again, it was March of 2020. We were all going into the pandemic mode, lockdowns, New York turned into a ghost town. And I was taking a lot of calls at the time, both from clients who told me they just wanted to hear my voice and know that everything is on course and fine. And they knew I'm buying things. I learned that this is the time to buy. And I was buying things, not treasuries, but actual businesses, and they were coming my way. But I took a lot of calls from fellow friends and investors that I respect a lot, and I realized what an emotional, psychological experience it is. And it's not that there was the worst advice to get out, but it was a setup where they could not take the potential pain anymore. And I think it's very, very important when you think about investing that you have to structure your world, structure your portfolio, structure your circumstances that you can wait. And I think the big lesson from our entire conversation is, among others, is that you have to have a way to be patient. Patience is an aspiration, but you have to have a way that you can wait. And March 2009, you had to be able to wait to see those businesses come around. And in March of 2020, you had to be able to wait. And I knew a lot of people that emotionally could not wait. And they told me openly, and I think, I could say it wasn't a good advice and I didn't take it, but I knew where they're coming from. They said they didn't want to have to go through what they went with 2009 and wait so long for things to come around. We both know that 2020 was followed by a big bull market, a correction. We have another bull market. I'm sure that in our lifetime we see many ups and downs, but all this to say, in times of real opportunity, don't be surprised that you're the only one in a position to act, even if you're in a room of seasoned investors, because you are not sharing their emotional makeup, you're not sharing their psychological, experience here. And if you're in a position to act in those moments, you will make a huge difference for your own portfolio, for your client's portfolio. And you can't wait for other people to tell you this is a good place to go. And related to that, I'll tell you, Vishal, that I would recommend stocks to an investment committee at different firms where I worked. And I noticed from my experience was that the stocks that were the most promising were the ones where the fewest people would agree with me on. And I found it time after time again. So it's no surprise that if it's a real opportunity and everybody is out of the stock, so to speak, everybody panicked, that's when very few people will agree with you. And you still have to have the conviction to act on it. So that was the worst advice, but the biggest lesson for me: just think for yourself at the end of the day. Don't hope that somebody will make the decision for you. Now, the best advice, it's a bit tricky, but I feel like the way I would put it is it's okay to reach for the biggest dream that you have. And it came as a message from quite a few people in my life, high school, college, and later on, where I think we are conditioned to play it safe. We think that it's safe, that we aim for a little bit less than we can because it's safe. And I think what really helps in life is to realize that if you really want something, then find a way to get it. And I'll tell you a few moments in my life where I felt like I was reaching maybe outside of how far my arms could reach, metaphorically speaking. And I was in Brussels. I was an exchange student, and I had this dream of going to study in Paris. I just love Paris. I still do. I think it's an amazing city. And maybe in another lifetime, I would have been a chef cooking French food. I don't know. But I didn't speak French. And I started learning French in Brussels. And my school in Poland had an agreement with the French school, so I could go straight from Brussels to Paris with my credits from Poland, but I didn't speak French. So I took that year to learn French. Very few people maybe know or remember that. Maybe I mentioned it. I don't think I did. But within 1 year, I took all possible language courses to learn French to the level that would allow me to pass the entry language requirement exam to my French school. So I woke up at 3 a.m. and I signed up at this university course, and it was one more. And when I got home, I would turn on the French radio in Brussels. I would listen to French radio all day, and I just wanted to fully immerse myself. So I was really, what it felt like I was reaching beyond what was within my arms. And I went to Paris. I took the exam. And Vishal, I failed that exam by half a point. And I thought it was the end of the world. But the school, as an exception, extended an acceptance letter to me. And they said, we know that you belong here. Come back next year and retake that test. And it's a really good school in Paris. It's Sciences Po. And I came back next year. I retook the test. They gave me an extra year to learn the language. And I not only studied there and graduated and got my second degree from that school, but I also got myself elected to the student board of that school. And at some point, I was sitting in a room with all French students, French professors, and French members of the board of the school. And I was the only foreign student sitting there and giving some speech talk in French to the dean. And I was thinking, don't tell anybody that anything is impossible, because if you really put your mind to it, you can do it. And coming to New York was the same thing. A lot of people told me, why would anybody hire you at an investment thing in a firm in New York? Don't they have enough people in New York already? And I thought it doesn't matter, because I want it, and I'll find a place and I'll find somebody who will open the door for me. And I was lucky enough to find an opportunity to come to New York. So anytime somebody tells you that something is not possible, I'll double down on that, Vishal, and you will be one of very few people that know. But I had a teacher, an English language tutor, that told me that I will never learn to speak in English. So she was giving me lessons, and then she told my parents, he doesn't have a gift for languages. He will never learn. Maybe she's listening to this, so hello. And but I do remember that. Here I am, sitting with you, and not only I learned to speak the language, but some people even think there was never a time that I didn't speak it. But anyways, you meet people in your life, or you come across all kinds of hurdles in your life where you feel like it's insurmountable, it's beyond your reach. The best advice that I received over the years is that whatever you want to reach for it. It's like aiming for the stars, ending up on the moon. Just go for it. Don't go with the plan B. So here I am speaking to you. I learned on the way not only English, that's not my mother tongue, but I wrote my books, and I wrote more in English than in Polish, which is my mother tongue. But I learned French on the way, and I can get by in Spanish. So whatever that teacher thought was not very helpful. Not a good advice, but it led to a realization that you should aim for the stars. because you might end up further than you think.
I think that's also the central idea of the alchemist that you're talking about, and probably a
Yes.
great lesson for people who I think live by the labels that are imposed upon them. Right, we all live by the labels that are given to us: underachievers, or failures, or mistakes, and all those kind of things. But getting over those labels and living the life that we want to live, right? Because as you mentioned, you have a choice, you want to do it, right? And I'm sure there is someone who's going to help you, guide you, mentor you in that journey, and you'll find your way through it, which you did, whether it was learning French, whether it was coming to New York. Your story is a great lesson for those young adults or young people listening to this idea, who believe that certain things are impossible. Of course, certain things are impossible in this world, but there are a lot of things which are under our control if we can just work and focus on things which are under control, right? Instead of worrying about the outcomes I'm sure are going to take care of themselves, right? This is the way I live my life. I'm sure this is how you also do. Of course, it's always a good idea to aim for things, like you said, aim for the stars. Always have those big goals in mind, big dreams, and that's the reason you that's one of the greatest motivation that really pushes you to try and fulfill them. But again, the other side is that if you just keep doing your work in the right way, if you just keep walking, that taking that next step and the next step and the next step, you'll reach places that you never thought existed, right? So I think that's a great lesson. So thanks for sharing all that. You you just made a passing mention that probably you could have been a chef in Paris. But I had this question about the parallel universe. If you were not in finance, what would you be doing now? Would you have been a chef or something else?
I think I love books too much not to have them in my life. So when you ask that question, I saw myself being surrounded by books. So it would have to be some sort of a pursuit that allows me to pick up and read and write, hopefully, as well. So either I would be a historian. I love history. And I'm reading a book now. It's World History by Philip Parker. And it's a beautiful book because it shows that the history is a character itself. It means that it shows how, when you think about it, a lot of history books just start and say, this is what happened. And he says, how do we even know that it happened? And it's such a wonderful way of looking at source. You learn about the company. Vishal told me it's a good company. Can I look at the original filing to find out on my own if it's good quality in my mind? And reading that book kind of reminded me of what curiosity, what research is all about. But I would be a historian, and I would probably lean into my teaching side more. So I had interns over the years, and I feel like writing and a podcast is a way for me to share what I've learned. But I see myself as a professor at a university running with books in a rush and teaching something. I think that would be something that I could do. And I have friends who are investors who also teach. So that's something that's on my mind. And I like the idea. I like seeing how new ideas have an impact on people. So I would sit down with some of my interns or younger clients, and I would show them something from a different perspective. And you see this moment in their eyes when they realize something, and you introduce them to something new. And I think true teachers that love teaching love that moment when they introduce somebody to something new. So probably a historian or a professor at a university somewhere would be something that I'd be doing. But I feel like in many ways, I am a historian, I am a teacher, and I am an investor in this life. It's just that I get to do it all at the same time. And I have this permission to read anything I want. And hopefully some of it is useful to me, to my clients, or anybody that reads or listens to what I have to share. But yeah, it's a fascinating idea. What would I do had I not picked up one up on Wall Street?
I think we are sailing on the same boat on the journey of life, being historians in our own way, being writers, being teachers in our own ways through the work that we are doing. So I think thanks to the pursuit, probably in investing, that really has helped us, I'm sure, in donning all these hats that we've been always thinking of doing. So in some ways, probably we already doing that. Uh, A couple of questions. One that probably would lead you to imagine for a moment, right? It's a hypothetical question, and imagine you know that you're going to forget everything tomorrow. You're going to lose your memory tomorrow morning when you wake up, right? And you have an opportunity today to write a letter to yourself to start your life afresh. So, what are those few things, maybe two or three things that you're going to write in that short letter to yourself, so that once you lose your memory tomorrow, but you have that letter with you, you can restart your life well?
Wow, this is such a interesting mental exercise. You know, I was thinking there's a book, I'm trying to remember the context, but there's a book, it will come back to me, where at the end of the book, there's some thoughts about the author when he was young. And it's a book about the power of thought. I'll look up the title. I'll mention it to you in a second. It will come back to me. But in the book, it says this story that as a kid, he was reading books. And his father said that you're ahead of your age and you're reading books that an older person would read. And then there's this paragraph in that story, how it's a true story about the author, how he was looking for answers that were left for him by other people, the imminent dead. And I thought you and I talk about it, and you talk about Charlie. Charlie has spent his whole life looking for those messages from the past. And it's that idea of, the past selves or the past beings, present beings, and the future beings. And there's a wonderful book about the future self by Hal Hershfield that allows us to imagine the future self. And in that book, he says how it's very hard for our minds to understand what that future self will be, right? So you want to do something good for today that your future self will benefit from, not even the people that will follow, but your future self. But you're asking a specific question, just one letter, three things, and having a message for the future self as much as the imminent dead left messages for us. I hope that I will never, forget what I know. I feel like my mind has such a big importance to me. But if I forgot anything, I think I would leave for myself some directions where to find what I should be looking for. And if it's only three things, maybe I would point that person, myself, to people that could teach me or reteach me something. And I will have to go back to, if I have to choose three, Charlie has to be on the list. I would say, I'm not here to tell you this, but if you're reading this, look up this person and read everything you can, or listen and watch everything you can about Charlie. And I think that future self that forgot everything would find a lot of wisdom in what Charlie has to say. There are a few books that made an impression on me that are outside of investing. And Paul Singer wrote a book about, it's called Untethered Soul. I don't know if you're familiar with the book, but it's one of the books that shares ideas from many other books. But I would definitely include something that you talk about spirituality, but something that allows this new self without memory to think of the world as something more. And I think there are some books like that I would point that future self to reconnect with the messages. It's tricky. I think of, family fortunes, family legacies, the families that I sit down with and I talk, and that bridge between the past and the present and the future comes up in conversations. And sometimes we sit down and we talk about something, and I realize we get lost in minutia of, tax consequences, investment decisions, and so on. And I pause and I say, and I ask, what do you think the intention would be of the person that's no longer in the room? And kind of when you ask that question, I thought of myself as the previous self that had all this knowledge accumulated so far is no longer in the room. And this new self cannot benefit. And the only bridge that you leave me is this one letter with three things. So I think in those conversations about the intention, and I asked my clients, what do you think the intention was? There are trusts and documents and legal language and a portfolio and so on. But what do you think the intention was? And I think in many situations, it clears up the conversation a lot, where we think of, What was the intention? What would they like to happen? And that gives us some answers. The third one would be, yeah, kind of a big picture intention for life. And I have to borrow from our previous conversation. And I would say, find a way to be of service to others. We can have all kinds of pursuits in life. After that, new me would discover Charlie and discover some sort of interpretation of the spiritual understanding of the world around us. I think it would be important for me to know, to recapture this bigger purpose in life. Why do you do what you do? And at the end of the day, it's being of service to others. So whatever I could learn and whatever I experience that could serve other people, that would be. But Vishal, it's a scary thought to forget everything that you know. And I have to bring it up, and maybe I'll corner you a little bit on this, but that dinner in Omaha, and I think this is later half of the episode, so we probably have fewer people with us, so it's safe to bring it up. Maybe not. Maybe people are listening to the second half more than to the first half. Who knows? But I asked you about the idea of immortal life. And it's been a thought on my mind because the capital, the wealth, the family wealth, it can reach a certain level of immortality because it gets reinvested and reinvested and reinvested. And when you really think about it, it's as close as you can get to immortality in that sense. But as humans, and you brought it up in this conversation with your wonderful questions, that our life has a limit. We can live longer, we can live shorter, and Charlie lived almost 100 years. That's a long time. But it ends at some point. So I asked that question to you, and I asked myself, if for a second you could imagine that you could live an immortal life, and I'll bring it up here and I'll share with you my thoughts. And I knew it was on your mind when we had that dinner in Omaha, but it's a mental experiment that I have, because for a second, you're no longer thinking about other people enjoying the shade of the trees you plant. You're thinking about yourself. So imagine that you could live forever. Let's say we stop aging at the peak level. I don't know if it's 35 or 45, whatever you want to choose, 25. I don't know, where you feel like you matured enough, you know enough, and you want to keep this shape and form forever. And in this hypothetical scenario, you can still hurt yourself and pass away, or you can be hurt and pass away that way, but nothing else will hurt you. You're not aging. You will not get sick. You can live forever. It completely reframes the element of time in my mind. It's like that moment when somebody inherits wealth that is almost unimaginable to spend in a lifetime. And you have this amount of time that you can't possibly fathom. It's open-ended. But I think in a peculiar way, both that fortune and this unlimited time actually slows you down. And you realize, I have unlimited money. I'm going to pay more attention. So if you have unlimited time, you could say, well, I can choose the minimum wage job in the US, let's say. And since I have unlimited time, I can work for 100 years and be paid nothing. But that's not what you're going to do. You're going to realize, now that I have unlimited time, my thought would be, I'm going to rearrange my life in a way when I don't have to work again in my life, is I don't have to. I want to rearrange my life so I can spend my time the way I want. I want to rearrange my life so I can learn as many things as I wish, because my life is open-ended. I can learn 20 languages if I want to. I can go to all the capitals of the world because I have unlimited time. I can live in all major cities in the world because I can go for 10 years to Mumbai. I can go for 10 years to Bangkok. I can go for 10 years to Tokyo. You start to think in a completely different way. The reason I bring it up, because I compare it to an unlimited family fortune and unlimited time, and I see how overwhelming the two experiences are. And both are very hard to imagine to many people. And I don't have an easy answer, but I think it's a fun thought experiment to go through when you think of any resource that we think is limited, to turn it into an unlimited. How would it change how you operate, how you think, if you knew that it's potentially unlimited, whether if it's your time or if it's your money? There's a wonderful essay written by Johnny Bronfman. It's called The Inheritance Experience. And she grew up in a wealthy family and wrote a book observing kind of from the outside what it's like to grow up with substantial wealth. And it's a human experience, just like me going with my grandpa, picking up Russian cards and not knowing the bigger world and being as happy as a clam. She writes in her book how people grow up with this almost unlimited wealth, and they think that everybody in the world is growing up with those kind of circumstances. They can go travel anytime, they can get anything they want, they can do whatever they like. I think it's such an overwhelming experience that some people told me that it feels like walking out of the house after a massive blizzard and everything is covered with snow. So there's no color, everything is white. Nothing is more exciting or less exciting, nothing is stimulating. I'm very, very curious how we would react if we knew that our life has no end. We could be here forever. And you told me that in some spiritual traditions, the end of life gives it meaning. But if we could play with this idea and say, we could be here forever, what other meaning can we find in a life that never ends?
No, I think this is something. I think I talked about the spiritual idea as well. That it's a death that gives birth to renewal, right? So you need both sides of the coin. The duality of life that we talk about in Hinduism as well, right? Everything has two sides. Uh, the idea of you living forever also, my view is that it requires the conditions that people around you are also going to live forever, right? Because if you think that only you are going to live forever in your unlimited time, then you are going to pass through a lot of those phases which you don't want to pass through, because you'll see people around you falling down, dying.
Yes.
Who do you live for? So that's a very personal and social way of looking at things. Who do you live for, right? Are you going to keep making friends since you have unlimited time? Or you keep changing territories, keep changing cities and making new friends? That's a wonderful concept. The second thought which I have on this idea of living forever is that when we talk about life, when we talk about being born on this planet, the second we are born, we are actually starting to walk towards death, right? We are growing in life, but we are growing towards death, right? If we have unlimited time, what are we growing up to? Do we stop growing? My thinking is that we would stop growing, because since we know that we don't we have we have 86,400 seconds, the number that we have, right? When you combine that idea that we have limited time in a day and we have limited days in our life, and we need to seize each day, live each day to the fullest, because we know that it's all going to come to an end, right? Same with money and capital. Though we talked about the idea of infinite wealth creation and the possibility of doing that for the future generations, we also, the underlying idea is that we are doing it not for ourselves. We have a finite life, and that really brings about this excitement of doing that infinite thing in this finite life. Because if we had, like our wealth that we're trying to create, if we also had infinite life and infinite amount of time in front of us, there won't be any spark in our lives, any driver for us to really be bothered about future generation, because the future generation is going to be I, me, myself, right? I'm going to be there
True.
in the future to enjoy all these things, right? So that idea of leaving behind something, a legacy for someone else to enjoy, to sit in the shade of a tree that you're going to plant, right? I think that idea, I think the first casual thought that comes to my mind when I think about the idea of immortality is how boring it is going to be, right? Probably you're going to, after some certain point of time, since we're talking about infinity, after certain point of time, you're going to run out of all the books that you want to read. You're going to probably run out of all the people that you want to meet, because your people are not going to survive, because it's a condition that you only have indefinite amount of time. So I think, but it's a great, like you mentioned, it's a great thought experiment that we can do for ourselves, to think in that way, that if what are we going to do, how are we going to live our lives if we have unlimited time, unlimited amount of money? Everything that comes to an end is probably keeps us growing, right? That's something that leads us to grow, right? Every leaf that falls off a tree it falls because another leaf is going to come in that place. That's the reason the leaf falls. So there's a renewal, right? If the leaf continues to be on the tree, on the branch, right, another leaf never gets a chance to be at the same place, right, to grow at the same place. So the for a new leaf to be born, the old leaf needs to die. Probably that's a nature of things, or the nature of life. So it's a deep question, I'm sure, and thank you for leading me to think about it. But I think, like we discussed last time, my view is that I think the idea of losing your memory is such a depressing but also such an exciting idea, right? That you're going to start with a clean slate completely. Like the idea of starting to, so it's like the first love, right? It's like picking up the intelligent investor for the first time. It's like finding about Warren Buffett for the first time. That was the most exciting thing for me,
True.
right? So starting a life from the very scratch, after seeing all my memory evaporate, and writing down on that piece of paper, I think such a nice thing. I have never tried to answer that myself. I'm scared of doing that. Right? What all am I going to do? But probably for you, I think in that list, probably you can also mention listening to Talking Billions, right? Because you yourself, like we talked about the chef, right? We bring a part of ourselves in everything that we do with all our heart and soul. So
True.
you've already put a part of yourself in Talking Billions and the books that you've written and the work that you've done, right? So to learn afresh about what Bogumil was all about, right? Or to give a new name to that creature, or that identity that's going to come up tomorrow morning once you lose your memory. Maybe you know that there's some part of you which is going to survive you as well, or your
Mm.
memory as well. So maybe going back to listening to Talking Billions and trying to find out the old you, or maybe a part of you that can start that life afresh, probably would be a great idea. So Talking Billions on the list.
Leaving something behind that could restart it. Yeah, I think it's a wonderful idea, and the fact that we can write down things and leave those things behind. I was at some point in Machu Picchu in Peru, and we know so little about the Inca culture because they had very limited writing. They were using knots, and they were not writing down as much as the Babylonians or the Egyptians, and obviously the Greeks and the Romans and many others. So we are trying to guess what the purposes were of those buildings. But then bringing it all the way to today, I feel like we went so far that everybody records everything and everybody has the ability to record everything. And many of us journal and so on. I think there will be an incredible amount of record about the lives that we have lived. But one thing is to know what happened, and the other thing is to truly understand and interpret. And even the living history that we're living, I think I have questions and I have a hard time understanding about different things that are happening. So it's fascinating to try to understand a conflict from 2000 years ago, and to think about something that's happening today and understanding why something is happening. And it is happening in many things are happening in the historical context today. But I wanted to bring up one thing that you brought up about the unlimited time. I want to put a twist to that immortal question. When you really think about it, day to day as humans, we wake up in the morning, we go outside, we do something, we spend our day. We're acting as if we had unlimited time. And some of us spend money as if we had unlimited funds. We go on a spree, we go shop. The credit card bill will come next month. That's too far to even think about. But when you really think about it, we are living our lives as if we were immortal. So you want to go to Paris and you say, well, I'll go to Paris next year or when I retire. A lot of things people postpone until they retire. How do you know you will be around? Right? So we're living our lives postponing a lot of things, thinking that there will be time. And sometimes we're treating money just like Brewster did. We spoke about Brewster earlier, as if there was this unlimited resource coming. But we know that it's not unlimited, and even the largest fortune can be squandered and wasted and misinvested, poorly invested and spent. So in a way, maybe we are already living as if we were immortal, and we have to be reminded, like the memento mori in Latin, that we are mortal, and we have to live within certain time and money constraints, confines. I think maybe it's a reminder. So it's kind of a play where we feel like, oh, I never thought about living as an immortal. Maybe we've been living as if we are immortal, eating foods that are hurting us down the road, spending money that's hurting us down the road, or having habits that are not helping down the road, or postponing the things we really want until a later time. Like John Saforic said, go for that walk in the middle of the week and don't feel bad about it. Do that now, because we don't know how many tomorrows we have left.
I think it's a beautiful thought, and I'm very grateful. I think in my own life to be living like John Saforic said, and I'm sure you also doing that, not feeling guilty of living your life the way you're doing it, because we understand that time is short and life is mortal. The idea of meditating on mortality, which I think learned from Indian scriptures, I've learned from Buddhist scriptures, people in Bhutan who are supposed to meditate on their mortality almost 5 times a day, not in a depressing manner that they're going to die, but the fact that because they are mortal beings, right? They need to be happy in their lives today, now, rather than pursuing some goal which is in the future, right? And I think that's a brilliant point that you made, that we're living our lives and spending our money as if there's unlimited time in front of us and unlimited money in front of us. And the moment we realize that we are mortal beings, the moment we realize that time is short, probably we'll be able to take a better look at our money, wealth, health, relationships, right? Saying that I love you to your son or your daughter or your spouse, trying to defer it to tomorrow, right? Because you're busy with your work, minting money. I think do it today. Call up that friend now, right? Talk to him or her now. Right? Doing today, without feeling that guilt. Okay, I need to take out time from my work and spend time on something that is not going to earn me money. Right? A lot of people are living their lives that way, but time is short. I think we are mortal beings, and that meditation is, I think, probably the best meditation that we can ever have. So, Bogumil, I have one last question, and this is not something that I'll lead you to imagine or lead you to think that you're going to lose your memory.
Okay.
Uh, and my question is about the fact that we all walk on our own journeys of life, and we all need to play our parts well. But what, according to you, is a life well lived?
That's a beautiful question. There's so many layers to it. To me, I think of waking up in the morning and being excited for the day ahead of me. That's at the beginning. And falling asleep and feeling like it's been a good day. And living that life as each day on its own and making the best use of it. But I also like the idea of having the big picture in mind of, the next 5, 10, or more years of me thinking that I'm doing the right thing that my future self would be grateful for. So it's a balance between the immediate indulgence in a way and thinking of what's beneficial for me in the long run. But a life well lived, we talked about money, we talked about time, but I think at the end of the day, it's the people that matter in our lives, the ones that are very close to us, our life partners, our friends, our family, and a larger network of people that we interact with, and they all leave a mark. I have images of different people that told me one thing, and I remember them. They're somewhere stored in my mind. And having that human experience of being around others on this planet and learning from them, interacting with them, and being helpful as much as we can be in various ways. And I think we started this conversation just for a minute, talking to a stranger visiting your town or leaving your town to meet a stranger. We realized that people in general are kinder and friendlier than maybe we're made to believe through the media and the news that we get. And all in all, when you travel, I just talked to somebody who traveled to Jordan, and she got to see Petra, the ruins that I'd like to see at some point. And she was traveling at a time where there was a lot of friction. It was a while ago, and obviously there's another conflict happening in the region now. But she was traveling through the region and meeting people, and people were helping, and the message of her story was that average people are as excited and interested in you as your neighbor, and they're kind, and there's a lot of people out there that are willing to help you no matter where you travel in the world. And I think that's very helpful to remember, that be that person to others, and realize, be open to be surprised how kind other people are when you travel the world, and make this time well spent and useful. I think that's you made me think about something when you said about talking billions as an example, that somebody would be listening to it, or I would be listening after I forgot. But all the things that we leave behind. And I had Morgan Ranstrom on the show, who's a musician and a finance professional, and he performs music, and he thinks of art as a legacy, what we leave behind. Think of all the things that we leave behind, the memories, but also the creation. Like this recording is a piece of art. It's a creation that will live long after we even remember we had this conversation. Although I hope you'll bring it up to my attention over dinner in Omaha again and say, you remember when we recorded that? So those things live on. So leaving all of those things behind, I think it adds color and meaning and richness to life. But waking up excited, falling asleep feeling like it was a good day, but not forgetting that you might be here for a while. So think about the long term too, not just the short term indulgence. And here I have to lean on Luca Dallana, who is a good friend, who was also on the show, who has this idea of optimizing your life as if you were to live a year or 50 years. And I thought of it as a fascinating idea, because there's this concept of living your day as if it was your last one. And I don't think it's a fair proposition, because if you were to live a day and knew that this is the only day you have left, so maybe you would skip shower, eat something that's not good for you, and I don't know what else you would do to take advantage of this one day. But imagine that you have many more days, right? So how would you optimize this one day as if you were to live for a year or a month, and as if you were to live for 50 years? How would you optimize so that whatever you're doing is a good choice in either direction? And Charlie had this remarkable runway of 100 years, but to think about it, it's touching immortality almost, right? And it's a long time to do a lot of different things in your life. And looking back, and I think I have this image of Charlie, but I always also thinking of myself, that I have so many books each night that I read a few pages of, and they're still open. And I'm sure that Charlie's bed, there are many books that remain open and will never be finished. So I'd love my life to be so full and have so many projects and ideas going, that the day when I'm called back to wherever I'm headed next, there are so many unopened books, and I'm equally excited on that very last day as I was when I was 20 and I discovered Peter Lynch. I'd love that feeling. And I think that's the feeling Charlie had. He wasn't done, and he was still rushing to do things that were still on his mind. And I'd love that image to have in my mind, that, well, maybe it's time, but I'm definitely not ready.
That's such a beautiful thought. I think you've left that image in my mind as well now, thinking about Charlie's unfinished books and the kind of books that we read and we don't finish, and a lot of things that we don't finish. Uh, when we, as you said, when we leave for some other junction, some other place, we are going to have a lot of such things, right? But we also try to, I think, in the short time, and believing that time is short and time is limited, we also need to ensure that we finish a lot of books, we meet a lot of people, we end a lot of conversation, in the sense we start and continue a lot of conversations like today's one. And it's been wonderful, more than 2 hours, Bogumil. It's, to use a word, I think this has been probably one of the most meditative conversations that I've had on the podcast, thanks to you. And it's like book into a writing or reading a book in 2 hours, with a lot of huge amount of lessons that I take away from this conversation. And I'm sure the listeners, the audience, is going to just love what you shared with me through your insights and experience. So thank you so much for everything. I look forward to meeting you in Omaha if I'm coming there, and I look forward to coming there. Like Warren said, right? He hopes that he comes there too. So I think we all hope that he comes there, and we all hope that we go there, meet each other, and probably start a new question or leave another question in each other's mind. So thank you so much, Bogumil, for everything, and all the best to you.
Well, Vishal, thank you so much. This was such a thoughtful, wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your questions, and you got me thinking about different moments in life and different lessons that I haven't thought about, and I'll be thinking for a long time after this conversation. But I'm very grateful that we made this happen, and I feel very blessed that Harry introduced us and that you're both in my life.
Yeah, wonderful. So it started with Hari. It should end with Hari. So thank you, Hari, for connecting me to Bogumil. Just love this conversation and love the connection that we built in such a short span of time. So thanks to you, thanks to Hari, and all the good friends.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bogumil.